The sky hung low with pregnant clouds, as if the very heavens had decided to veil Westeros in perpetual dusk. The wind carried with it the sharp bite of winter, the old, unrelenting cold that seemed to creep into bones and remain there. The wall, once an unshakable symbol of protection, separating the realms of men from the world beyond, was a jagged ruin. The aftermath of the war against the dead had left scars across the landscape, though life was slowly stirring once more. In the gray haze of this new dawn, Bran Stark sat in a simple wood chair, his cloak pulled tightly around his shoulders. His eyes were distant, milky, and lost in that space where time stretched infinitely. He was deep in thought, or so it appeared, though in truth, his spirit soared far beyond. Bran had grown in power and wisdom since the day he left Winterfell as a child crippled by a cruel fall. His journey north of the Wall had brought him face to face with the children of the forest and the three-eyed raven. Those encounters had changed him. He was no longer just Brandon Stark, brother to Sansa, Arya, Rickon, and half-brother, though truly cousin, to Jon Snow. He had become the living memory of the world, with the capacity to slip through time and see the webs of fate that bound men, beasts, and others alike. After the Great War, after the shattering terror of the undead horde, and after the Night King had seemingly been destroyed at the Battle of Winterfell, Bran discovered what many in the realm never would have guessed. The echoes of the Night King's existence did not simply vanish with a single well-placed blow. The threat, or perhaps the essence, of the ancient enemy lingered in the corners of time itself. The conflict was not so easily laid to rest. The stories told of the Night King described a silent, malevolent force, the embodiment of cruel winter. But as Bran delved deeper into his visions, as he allowed himself to become one with ravens flying across time, he sensed something else there, a tortured soul. He glimpsed pieces of history so old that even the children of the forest considered them myths. He saw flashes of a man, lost and bound in ice, and a pact forcibly struck against his will. The man had once been something else, someone else. He wore the Stark visage. He carried the somber pride of the North in his very marrow. And through these visions, Bran came to realize that the Night King might be more than the world's greatest villain. He was, in a way, kin to the Starks themselves. The notion unsettled Bran. Starks carried a proud legacy, built upon a foundation of honor, loyalty, and an unwavering sense of duty. The words of House Stark were simple: "Winter is coming." That phrase now took on new significance. For thousands of years, it served as a warning to the realms of men, a cautionary statement about the harshness of the season and what lurked beyond the wall. Yet there was another meaning hidden in the swirling cloak of ages. Winter had come once in the form of a Stark. How it happened, how one of the first men came to be the Night King, was a tapestry partially lost to time. Bran intended to unravel it. He chose to travel to the land of always winter, beyond the shattered wall, accompanied by a small group of loyal protectors. Among them were Mira Reed, who had returned after her father's duties called her away but insisted on at least helping him with this one final journey; Podrick Payne, now a knight in his own right after the wars that ripped the Seven Kingdoms apart; and the ever-watching Ghost, Jon's loyal direwolf, who refused to leave the North even after Jon Snow's departure. The wolf seemed to sense Bran's purpose and guarded him with an unspoken vow, one that had once bound Ghost to Jon. Perhaps in Ghost's ancient blood and primal memory, something recognized the old ways, the power in Bran's veins, and the resonance of the Stark name. They left Winterfell in the faint light of day, slipping through the remnants of the scattered forces still loyal to the North. The new king in the North, some said queen, depending on how the power fell with Sansa, was not in a position to question Bran's movements. He was, after all, the three-eyed raven and had to be trusted to shape the future. In truth, Sansa had quietly sanctioned her brother's journey, though she worried for his safety. They both knew some ties had to be severed and some truths had to be unveiled if the North was ever to rest from the threat of unnatural winter. As they journeyed north, beyond the haunted forest, beyond the raw edges of the civilizations that had tried to take root in the bitter cold, Bran felt the power of the weirwood trees thrumming, calling him. Whenever they made camp near a godwood or some lonely heart tree, its bark white as bone and its leaves red as fresh blood, Bran sank his mind into it, traveling through time and memory. Each vision peeled back a layer of darkness. He saw glimpses of a tall man, broad-shouldered and grim-eyed, wearing a wolf's head sigil on his cloak. He saw the children of the forest gathering around him, speaking a language that wound through the air like music and sorrow. He saw an obsidian blade pressed into the man's heart, saw the anguish transform into something inhuman and cold. He felt the presence of the great other swirling, an ancient power that thrived on death and emptiness. This man's face would remain with Bran even when he awoke. It was a face not unknown to him. It had the shape of Starks in it, the shape of an ancestor who might once have pledged his life to defend the realms of men, only to be turned into their destruction. Each time Bran returned from these visions, Mira would be at his side, her hand squeezing his shoulder, a quiet question in her eyes. He never had enough words to fully explain what he saw, though he tried. He told her that the Night King, in the earliest times, might not have chosen his fate. There was a purpose behind it, a secret locked within the ice that enveloped his being. And though Arya had struck him down once, that was only the corporeal form. Something of him lingered in the currents of time, tied to the land, tied to the ancient magic. If that essence persisted, then the threat might not truly be over. The group pressed on. The snows grew deeper, the wind harsher, and the sun became a pale disk on the horizon. They encountered strange quiet in those lands, as if all life had fled. Occasionally, they glimpsed a polar bear or packs of wolves with unnaturally white fur, but all kept their distance from the travelers. Bran felt the weirwood's presence dwindle. Here, the land was too cold, too buried for them to thrive. The flickers of green magic in the air were scarce, so he conserved his strength, saving it for the moment he would need it most. Eventually, they found themselves in a glacier-like expanse, a place Bran recognized from his visions. The ice shaped the land into twisting spires and unearthly formations, as if the breath of winter itself had sculpted them. The sky was an eternal twilight, faintly lit by the reflection of moonlight on snow. This was the edge of the known world, and perhaps a gateway to the unknown. Bran bid the others to make camp in a sheltered crevice where the ice offered some meager protection from the wind. A few scraggly pines clung to the frozen earth. Podrick worked diligently to set up tents and build fires. Mira hunted for any sign of game, but found none, so they relied on what provisions they had brought. Ghost prowled near the edge of camp, sniffing and testing the air as if sensing a presence that made him uneasy. That night, while the wind howled and the aurora shimmered above the glaciers, Bran slipped into the currents of time again. He reached out beyond the mortal present, letting the weirwood-laced power within him anchor to the mysteries that bound past and future. Slowly, he guided his consciousness toward the form he had seen, the tall, grim-eyed Stark ancestor who had been sacrificed to some dark ritual. He searched for the moment of transformation, the moment that had birthed the Night King. His senses were assaulted by the raw, primal magic of the children of the forest. Their language rose around him, chanting in an otherworldly harmony that resonated with the very bones of the earth. Then came the sharp sting of obsidian against flesh and the man's scream, echoing in 1,000 different worlds. Bran felt an ache in his own chest, as if the magic were ripping him apart. But unlike those days when he had tried to alter the past and nearly lost himself, he now had greater control. He observed, hovered, and learned. He saw the sorrow in the children's eyes, but also their desperation. A war between them and the First Men had ravaged the land. Their creation of the White Walkers was meant as a defense, not an instrument of genocide. But the power was too great, too unpredictable. The newly made White Walker, the first of his kind, rose, eyes shining cerulean in the gloom. The man who had once been a Stark was now something else. He was bound to the winter. He was the Night King, though he would not claim that title until time and bitterness warped him further. Bran pulled away, heart pounding in his chest when he opened his eyes. By the dying firelight, he saw Mira and Podrick stirring. Ghost let out a soft, haunting whine. They had all sensed something, an unease that permeated the air. Bran wiped beads of sweat from his brow. He felt a compulsion, a path unfurling before him. He knew then that the essence of the Night King was near, waiting in this frozen domain. The next day, they ventured further into the glacier fields. The wind battered at them, and their cloaks grew stiff with frost. Bran's powers guided them to a place hidden from ordinary sight. It was a hollow in the ice, a natural formation that descended like a spiral, its walls carved smooth by centuries of relentless wind. At the bottom lay a small frozen pool, black as night. Strange runes were etched around it, archaic symbols reminiscent of the carvings the children of the forest used near their weirwood circles. The air was unnaturally still. Even the wind, which howled above them, seemed to die as they entered this hollow. Bran insisted on going alone into the center of this place. Mira wanted to follow, but he gently dissuaded her. He felt it must be him. Only he, the three-eyed raven, could carry out what was needed. She reluctantly nodded, her protective instinct warring with her loyalty and trust. Podrick stood at the edge, hand on his sword, uncertain of what good steel would do against powers older than the ancient houses themselves. Ghost lay on the rim of the hollow, ears flat against his skull, muscles tense, as if ready to spring into action at the first sign of threat. Bran pressed onward, each step a struggle through the knee-high snow that had drifted in. When he reached the center of the hollow, near the frozen black pool, he carefully removed the thick gloves from his hands and placed his palm upon the ice. The cold was so intense that it felt like fire racing up his arm. He bit back a cry, forcing himself to remain focused. Summoning the green energy that flowed through him was akin to calling upon every memory in the world. He let the magic rise in him, swirling around his heart, guiding it into the ice. Time seemed to slow and then collapse around him. The images that assaulted him were fierce. He saw the armies of the dead marching. He saw dragons of ice in some far-future nightmare. He saw the moment Arya plunged her blade into the Night King's side at the Battle of Winterfell, the shock in those cold eyes, the fracturing of that ancient magic. And then he saw behind all of that, deeper in the timeline, an echo in the present, a presence still lingering, waiting for something. In that presence, there was a tortured sense of longing, like a man who had been chained in a dark cell for uncountable years. Bran pressed harder, feeling the frostbite threatening to take his fingers, yet he was beyond caring. A shape formed beneath the ice, faint at first. It was a figure, clad in tattered garments of black and gray, the faint memory of a dire wolf sigil on the chest, half obscured by centuries of ice. The face was gaunt, the flesh withered and pale, yet the eyes were open, flickering that dreadful blue. But they looked at Bran not with hatred, but with a resigned sorrow. The presence that had once been an unstoppable force of destruction now seemed hollow, a shell that had served a role it never asked for. Bran felt the truth resonate. Once a Stark, always a Stark, even if twisted by dark enchantment. Carefully, Bran extended his powers, bridging the gap between the living and the dead. It was beyond warging, beyond greensight. He reached into the current of magic that tethered them, a line woven from the moment the first men set foot on Westerosi soil, through every generation of Stark, culminating in Bran's own existence as the living repository of memory. It was that link he used to call forth the echo of the man behind the monster. He felt resistance, a colossal wall of cold emptiness. The memory of the White Walkers, the Great Other's influence, all the ancient hatred that had festered when the first of their kind was created. Bran pushed through it, letting the warmth of life and memory fill the void. He recalled the old stories of the Night's Watch, how they once followed a Lord Commander who was said to have taken a strange bride with skin like the moon. Some believed that man to be the Night King. Others thought it was a tall tale. And yet, here was a piece of that story coalescing in front of Bran's eyes. At first, the shape beneath the ice remained still, frozen in time. But then the slightest tremor ran through its limbs. One hand moved, pressing upwards, as if to meet Bran's hand on the opposite side of the ice. There was a faint cracking noise, barely audible over Bran's thundering heartbeat. The ice parted like black glass, spiderweb fractures radiating around Bran's palm. He drew back, startled, as a swirl of icy water seeped up. Though the water was of the bitterest cold, steam rose from it, tinted with arcane power. In that moment, Bran knew the healing was not simply physical. He had to break the chains of compulsion that bound this soul. The Night King had been a puppet at the start, wielded by a magic too strong to be contained. The warlike hearts of men and the desperate hearts of the children had shaped a being of unstoppable power. Over the centuries, every blow, every act of violence, every cold wind had fed that aspect of him. But behind it all, there remained a kernel of the man who had once sworn to uphold the honor of the Stark name. It was to that essence that Bran reached out. And he found it frail but alive, a tiny flame hidden deep in the swirling ice. Bran sank to his knees, ignoring the stabbing cold. He steadied himself, letting centuries of knowledge pass through his mind, searching for the ancient ways of healing. He recalled how the children would sing to the weirwoods, merging souls with nature. He recalled how the first men forged pacts with the old gods to end the wars that once threatened every living creature. Now, in this ultimate moment, the memory of those pacts echoed in his veins. He began to speak words he did not consciously know, words of the old tongue that had been locked away in the most hidden recesses of his mind, gleaned from the heart trees and the three-eyed raven's teaching. He chanted in a soft voice, letting the vibrations pass into the ice, letting them carry to the figure beneath. The ice cracked further. Shards floated on the surface of the black water. A pale hand rose, breaking the surface, its flesh spotted with frost and death, the fingernails blackened and elongated. Yet there was something changing in the color of the hand, a faint flush of something that might have been life. Bran did not recoil. He placed both of his hands around that cold hand, mindful of the searing pain, and continued to chant. He poured into that contact all the memories of House Stark, the heroism of Brandon the Builder, the unwavering guardianship of Eddard Stark, the bravery of Robb Stark, the cunning of Arya, the resilience of Sansa, the adventurous spirit of Rickon, the nobility of Jon Snow and every other ancestor who had carried the name Stark. He gathered them together like threads in a tapestry, forging a single link to the battered soul he sought to free. Gradually, the figure in the pool began to emerge. First came the head and shoulders, like a man rising from a bitter, cursed baptism. His hair was white as the snow around them, but it clung to his scalp as if once, long ago, it had been a shade of dark brown. His face, gaunt and drawn, slowly gained dimension as though the lines of death receded inch by inch. Icy cracks flaked off him, drifting away on the surface of the water. The eyes that had once glowed an unearthly blue flickered as though uncertain which color they should claim. For a moment, a swirl of white and blue battled there, and then something else appeared, a hint of the gray color typical of House Stark. Through it all, Bran did not falter. The chanting continued. The presence of the Great Other hissed and recoiled as if a new force challenged its hold. He felt the cold intensify, trying to freeze the blood in his veins, but he held on, trusting in the power of the old gods and the oath he silently carried. The same oath that Ned Stark had lived by, to protect the realm, to stand for justice, to never falter in the face of darkness. A wave of magic exploded from the center of the pool. Mira and Podrick cried out from the rim of the hollow, shielding their faces from swirling shards of ice. Ghost let out a fierce howl that reverberated across the land. In that instant, Bran felt something give way. The magic of compulsion that had once turned the Stark into the Night King cracked, releasing a surge of energy that spun around them. Bran held tightly to the man's hand, gritting his teeth through the pain. Then, silence. The wind had died completely. The swirling ice and snow settled. Where there had been a swirling vortex of dark power, there was now a stillness like the eye of a storm. The man before Bran knelt in the shallow water, half submerged, his head bent. Steam rose from him in wisps. With great effort, he lifted his face to Bran's. No longer was it the face of an undead king or a monstrous entity. It was wan, pale from countless years lost to the cold, but it bore human lines. The eyes that met Bran's were a stormy gray blue, reminiscent of a winter sky. Bran felt tears welling in his own eyes. He could not say how he knew, but he felt certain this man was free at last. He was a Stark, though from a time lost so far into history that no one living could name him. Awkwardly, the man opened his mouth, a rasping sound escaping his lips as though he had not spoken in millennia. He did not yet have the strength to articulate words, so he simply bowed his head in profound gratitude. With Mira's help, Bran coaxed the newly freed man from the black water. Podrick produced spare clothing from his pack. It was a meager tunic and a cloak, but it would serve. Podrick and Mira cast uncertain looks at each other, for even though Bran had guided the healing, fear prickled at them. The man who had once been the Night King was now trembling like a leaf in a gale. His body, unaccustomed to mortal warmth, shuddered violently. Mira removed her fur-lined cloak and draped it around him, giving what comfort she could. Ghost, hackles raised, approached slowly, his red eyes glaring. He sniffed at the man but did not bare his teeth. Whatever threatened presence he once sensed was gone or receding. Bran, exhausted beyond measure, slumped into the snow. Each breath felt like a jagged splinter in his lungs, and he feared he had done himself grave harm by channeling so much power in a place where the old god's influence was so thin. Yet a strange joy filled him. They had done what no one in Westeros would have dreamed possible. They had saved the soul of the Night King, unraveling him from the monstrous fate he had been shackled to. The group made their way back to the camp in a haze, guiding the weakened man between them. Podrick and Meera supported Bran and their mysterious charge. Ghost scouted ahead. Night had fully fallen, but the aurora lit the sky in ghostly ribbons of green and pink. The snow sparkled with a haunting beauty. The newly freed Stark whispered something, the first words he managed to form. No one quite understood him, as it was in the ancient dialect of the First Men, but Bran recognized a few terms from his hours spent delving into the old tongues. It was a phrase of thanks, a promise of servitude, or so it seemed. Yet there was also a questioning note, as though he asked where he was or who they were. Bran tried to soothe him, placing a hand on his shoulder. The man stilled, trusting the presence of one who had led him out of the endless cold. They huddled in their tents that night, building the fire as large as they dared. The man who was once the Night King sat closest to the flames, as though trying to learn the feeling of warmth again. Bran remained awake as long as his weary body would allow, wanting to keep watch to ensure that nothing of the darkness lingered in the man's soul. Despite his best efforts, Bran soon drifted into an exhausted slumber. In the darkness of his sleep, Bran's dreams carried him through the heart of the Weirwood network again, though this time he did not seek out old memories. Instead, the trees themselves seemed to call to him. He sensed the presence of the children, though they were now fewer in number than ever before. Their voices whispered with gentle relief, as if a calamity had been averted or at least diminished. But there was also a trembling caution in their song, a question about what fate awaited a man once bound by such malevolent magic. Could the transformation be undone so easily, or did shadows still lurk? When Bran awoke, dawn was a pale glow on the horizon. Meera was feeding the fire, Podrick was sharpening a blade with mechanical diligence, and the man once known as the Night King was staring at his hands, flexing his fingers in wonderment. Bran struggled to sit up, every muscle protesting. Meera rushed to help him, and Podrick ceased his task to offer some water. Bran drank greedily, parched from the strain of the night's magic. The man watched them with eyes full of questioning. Then he pointed at Bran, at Podrick, at Meera, then placed a hand over his own chest. He spoke in a halting voice of the old tongue, sounds falling from his lips that had not been uttered by men in thousands of years. Bran caught fragments of meaning. I man, who you? He struggled to piece it together. The notion that he was free from the clutches of his old existence was evident. The man seemed overwhelmed. Bran spoke slowly, using every scrap of old language he had gleaned. I am Bran Stark, he said, tapping his chest to indicate himself. Then he pointed to the man, asking who he was. The man opened his mouth to respond, but faltered as though uncertain what name to claim. Eventually, he managed a single word. It sounded like Saren or perhaps Saron. The shift in dialect was too vast to be certain. Bran repeated it gently, Saren, to which the man nodded. Saren Stark, Bran ventured, testing the name. The man frowned as if he recognized the name Stark, but it caused him confusion or pain. After a moment, he gave a slow nod, though it was hesitant. Perhaps in some distant corner of his mind, he retained his lineage, but everything else was lost, buried under eons of being something else. Bran accepted that for now. It was enough that he acknowledged his humanity. They spent the day nurturing him, offering bits of dried meat and what remained of their bread. He bit down, chewing slowly, discovering flavor and texture like a newborn tasting food for the first time. He drank water, coughed, drank again, and pointed at the fire with awe as if only now comprehending what heat felt like. Meera managed to coax a few more words from him, though the meaning was elusive. Podrick tried to communicate with gestures. By midday, the man was able to stand steadily on his own, though he shivered constantly. The climate of the far north was no friend to mortal men, yet ironically, it was not the deadly cold he had grown accustomed to as the Night King. It was a new, more immediate chill to which his living nerves had to adjust. They decided they could not remain in this place for long. Their supplies were limited, and the cold would claim them all if they tarried. Bran's objective was achieved, at least in part. He had freed the soul the children had once enslaved to winter's fury. But now came the question, what next? If they returned him to Winterfell, what would that mean? People would be terrified, or at the very least confused. Could he even survive the journey south? And was he truly free of any lingering link to the White Walkers? Bran sensed that time would tell. For now, they had to keep him safe and hope for the best. They packed their meager belongings and began the long trek back toward the ruins of the wall. Traveling was slower now, for even though the man Saren, as Bran had named him, grew steadier on his feet each day, they dared not push him too hard. Each night they made camp, huddling around the fire, and slowly introduced him to their words. Over the days, Saren picked up a few phrases of the common tongue. He stumbled over them, but he tried. He showed a quiet determination that reminded Bran of the typical Stark spirit. Ghost remained cautious around him. The dire wolf would circle the camp at night, occasionally glancing at Saren with an inscrutable gaze. Perhaps Ghost sensed the vestiges of the inhuman power that had once animated him. Perhaps he was merely perplexed by the man's scent, which was neither living nor dead in the wolf's memory. But there was no outright hostility, and on one cold evening, Saren tentatively reached out and patted Ghost's flank. The wolf tolerated the contact with a soft rumble. A tiny gesture, but a momentous one under the circumstances. As the group forged ahead, the snowstorms lessened, and the bleak, sunless sky gave way to the occasional glimpse of sunlight. They skirted the edges of forests, ventured across frozen rivers, and encountered wildlings traveling in small bands. These wildlings regarded Bran's group with wary curiosity, more so when they noticed Saren. His pallid complexion, his stark gray-white hair, and the solemn cast of his face marked him as an odd figure. However, no one recognized him as the terror once known as the Night King, and for that, Bran offered silent thanks to the old gods. In time, they reached Tormund Giantsbane's settlement, one of the few stable communities that had sprung up since the war. Bran knew Tormund was a friend to Jon Snow and likely would offer them shelter. Tormund was taken aback by Bran's arrival, for the rumors had placed him elsewhere. Yet the big wildling greeted them warmly. His bright eyes flickered with curiosity at Saren, who hovered in Bran's shadow, cautious around strangers. Tormund offered them his mead hall to rest, and they took the respite gratefully. Over bowls of stew and horns of ale, Tormund pressed Bran for answers. Bran, in turn, gave the simplest version he could, that in his visions he discovered an old power still lurking in the far north, something that needed to be set right, and that he believed this man, Saren, was part of it. Tormund seemed doubtful. You mean to say you found the Night King in the ice and turned him into a man? You'd forgive me for saying that's as mad as an owl in daylight. Bran offered a faint smile. Not mad. The magic was old, older than any of us. It was a gamble, perhaps, but I believe we succeeded. The wildling frowned, eyeing Saren, who sipped at a bowl of stew as if amazed by every taste. If he is who you say he is, we should be burying him in a pit of dragon fire, not feeding him stew, Tormund said, though not unkindly. But you're a Stark, and if you say this is what you must do, I'll not stop you. Bran nodded in gratitude. He's free. I sense it. He has no desire to harm anyone. Tormund grunted. Well, if he turns ice-blue eyes on me in the middle of the night, I'll not hesitate to put a spear through him. Despite the tension underlying the statement, the rest of the evening passed peacefully. Saren quietly observed the rowdy wildlings, occasionally repeating small words he overheard in an attempt to learn. Some of the children giggled at him, but he managed a timid smile. It was a striking change from the visage of the Night King that once terrified entire armies. They stayed in Tormund's settlement for a few days, gathering strength and supplies for the journey south. Over the time, Saren managed to pick up enough phrases to hold a halting conversation. He told Bran, in half the old tongue and half common, that he remembered very little of his old life. Fragments haunted him, standing on the shores of the neck, vowing to uphold the ways of the first men, falling in love with a woman whose face he could not recall, the sound of wolves singing in the night. Then all turned to ice, to an endless stretch of cold and cruelty. Even those memories were faint, as though glimpsed through a cracked pane of glass. Bran offered him what comfort he could. When at last they departed, Tormund provided them a small sled and a hardy horse. Bran still had difficulty walking for long periods due to his crippled legs, and though Mira and Podrick could help carry him, the horse would ease the burden. As they made ready to leave, Tormund clasped Saren's arm in a rough farewell. I don't know if you truly are the one we feared, but you saved my friend Bran here. That's enough for me for now. Saren gave a shy nod. Thank you, he managed in the common tongue. Tormund tilted his head, impressed by the improvement in speech, if nothing else. So it was that the four companions, Bran, Mira, Podrick, and Saren, set off again, Ghost stalking alongside. Their aim was the remnants of Castle Black, or what was left of it after the great battles. From there, they might find passage south. Bran's intention was to bring Saren to Winterfell, a place that was quite possibly his ancestral home. What then would happen, he did not know, but he believed strongly that the power of the Weirwoods would watch over them. They traveled for weeks through the changed landscape of the north. Much of it had been ravaged by the invading armies of the dead. Abandoned villages, blackened remains of farmhouses, and shattered watchtowers dotted the horizon. Yet green shoots began to push through the snow in some places, a testament to the world's resilience. The group encountered few people, mostly nomadic wildlings or soldiers patrolling the region, ensuring no stray whites remained. In each encounter, Saren tried to shrink into the background, though none recognized him for what he had been. His eyes were no longer that chilling azure, and his bearing was far from regal or menacing. He was quiet, introspective, and at times haunted, but no longer terrifying. At night, Bran continued to dreamwalk. He found that whenever he tried to look too closely at Saren's timeline, he encountered a swirling void. The old enchantments still cast shadows, obscuring the details of the man's life. He suspected it might only fade with time or further healing, and for now, he had no wish to force it. For Saren's part, he sometimes woke from nightmares. Mira once saw him standing outside his tent, staring at the moon with tears in his eyes. When she approached, he murmured that he remembered a promise, a vow, something about protecting, about building, about a winter that was not supposed to be so cruel. She listened gently, though she could offer no solutions. The best they could do was encourage him, remind him that he was no longer alone, that he had people who cared about him now, no matter how strange his circumstances. Eventually, they reached the shattered remains of Castle Black. The colossal breach in the wall was a testament to the unstoppable might the Night King's dragon once wielded. Rubble and ice sprawled in monstrous heaps, forming a jagged pass. Soldiers bearing the banner of the New Night's Watch, an attempt to rebuild the order after the devastation, kept vigil. There were fewer of them than in generations past. Their watch was now more ceremonial, or perhaps simply an attempt to keep tradition alive. For with the breach, the wall was no longer the shield it once had been. The commander of the makeshift garrison, a grizzled man named Morley, looked surprised to see Bran Stark. He bowed, somewhat awkwardly, knowing Bran's status as both a Stark of Winterfell and the mysterious three-eyed raven. He offered them food and a place to sleep. When Morley asked about Saren, Bran stated only that he was a traveling companion, a man from the far north who had been injured during the war and was slowly recovering. That was enough for the commander, who had more practical concerns, such as how to feed his men and repair the damage in a land still struggling to produce crops. Bran inquired about a way through the rubble. Some old tunnels still led under parts of the wall that remained intact. Morley warned that many passages had collapsed, but a few were passable. With the help of the garrison, Bran and his companions managed to navigate a winding, half-flooded tunnel, and soon they stood on the southern side of the wall. For Bran, it felt like crossing a boundary between worlds. For Saren, it must have been even more profound. South of the wall, the air felt marginally warmer. Patches of grass peeked through the snow, and flocks of ravens soared overhead, cawing. Bran looked at Saren, who gazed over the landscape with wonder, as though it was the first real sign of life he had seen. "Home," Bran said softly, pointing ahead. "Winterfell is our home." Saren nodded. A spark lit in his eyes, an echo of recognition. Maybe, or perhaps just curiosity. Either way, they pressed on, following the King's Road. The journey took several more days. They passed near small holdfasts that were being rebuilt. The small folk who saw them often recognized Bran, or at least recognized Mira's and Podrick's insignias enough to know they were traveling with someone of import. Saren drew sidelong glances. He did not speak much in public, leaving the talking to Bran or Podrick. At night, they slept in inns or rough camps by the roadside. The further south they went, the more alive the land became. Deer roamed the forests and squirrels darted among the trees. The first wildflowers of spring dotted the edges of the road. For a man who had existed in unending ice, it must have been a tapestry of miracles. Finally, on a crisp morning, they caught sight of Winterfell's walls rising in the distance. Smoke curled lazily from the chimneys, and banners bearing the dire wolf sigil fluttered in the breeze. Bran felt a wave of emotion. He had not seen his ancestral seat since he departed on this quest. The last time he stood within those walls, he had not fully understood how crucial this mission would be. Now, he had returned with the greatest secret in the North's history at his side. The gates opened for them. The guards bowed, stepping aside. The courtyard was bustling with activity, blacksmiths hammering, stable boys rushing about, and servants unloading supplies. A hush fell when they noticed Bran's arrival, followed by quick bows and murmured greetings. Bran's eyes scanned the area, searching. He spotted Sansa standing near the entrance to the Great Hall, flanked by advisors. Her hair was caught in a long braid, and she wore the heavy cloak befitting the Lady of Winterfell, or the Queen in the North, as some called her. She caught sight of Bran and rushed forward, her expression tinged with relief and surprise. "Bran," she said, her voice warm. She took his hands. He could see the questions forming in her eyes. "You've been gone far longer than I expected." "I'm sorry," Bran replied softly. "But it had to be done." Sansa regarded Saren, who stood slightly behind Bran, his posture uncertain. Mira and Podrick hovered, ready to intervene if needed. Sansa raised an eyebrow. "Who is this?" she asked with the composed air of a ruler, though concern flickered in her gaze. Bran exhaled slowly. "It's complicated," he said. "But I trust him, Sansa. I know this may be hard to believe. He was our ancestor, the root of the legend of the Night King." Sansa's eyes widened and her advisors muttered anxiously. She motioned for them to be silent, but her face betrayed shock. "Bran, that can't be." He squeezed her hand. "It is. And he's free now." Her gaze darted over Saren's face, as if looking for some hint of the monster the entire North once feared. She saw only a fragile figure, pale and thin, wearing rough-spun clothes and a borrowed cloak. His eyes were no longer that hideous blue. She looked back to Bran for an explanation, but he merely nodded. "Let's speak privately," she said, ushering them all into the Great Hall. The Great Hall of Winterfell felt like a refuge. Fires blazed in the hearths, tapestries depicting the wolf sigil lined the walls, and the scent of roasted meat drifted from the kitchens. Sansa led them to a private chamber off to the side. Arya was there too, having been in council with Sansa. Her reaction was sharper. She reached instinctively for the dagger at her belt when Bran explained the situation. Yet a single glance at Bran's earnest expression and she relaxed, trusting her brother's judgment. Saren, sensing he was the subject of scrutiny, stood quietly. His gaze flicked over the Stark sisters, recognition stirring in his eyes at the cast of their features, so similar to the face he once saw in a mirror countless centuries ago. They were family in some deep, distant way. But how to convey that when his words were so few? Bran recounted the tale, sparing no detail. He spoke of his visions, the discovery of the man behind the monster, the perilous journey into the land of always winter, the healing ritual in the black ice pool. He explained that Saren was once a Stark, possibly one of the earliest. How the children of the forest had created the White Walkers to defend themselves against the first men, how that power had corroded and twisted him over millennia. Finally, how the final blow at the Battle of Winterfell had shattered his physical form, but not his entire being. Arya listened, her face grim. She had witnessed firsthand the terror of the White Walkers. The idea that the Night King could live on in any form shook her. "If this is true," she said, searching Saren's face with narrowed eyes, "then we owe him as much kindness as any broken soldier of war. But I'll not hesitate to kill him if he shows any sign of that old power." "I understand," Bran said, meeting her gaze. "And so does he, I believe." Sansa stood, circling around Saren with measured steps. Then she addressed him directly, her voice gentle but firm. "Do you understand where you are? This is Winterfell, home of the Starks, your home. No harm will come to you here unless you mean harm." Saren looked at Bran, then back at Sansa. "Slowly, he know?" "Deaded." In the old tongue, he murmured a few words, which Bran translated as, "Thank you. No harm. I am free." Those words alone made Sansa's eyes soften. She reached out to lay a hand on Saren's arm. He didn't flinch, though he looked uncertain. She offered a small smile. "Then let us welcome you," she said, though the worry had not completely left her face. They settled Saren in a chamber near the library tower, away from the bustle of the main guest quarters but still within reach of warmth. Bran could see to his needs there, and Samwell Tarly, if he ever returned from his duties in the Citadel, might be able to help as well. For now, the maester at Winterfell, a cautious man named Jonard, tended to Saren, examining him for any signs of frostbite or lingering maladies. He found nothing physically strange aside from the pallor of his skin and the hint of old scarring around his chest where the obsidian blade had first pierced him so many centuries ago. But the maester admitted he was at a loss for how to treat someone who had been, in essence, an undead creature. Meanwhile, life at Winterfell went on. Visitors arrived to petition Sansa, supply caravans came and went, the blacksmith hammered steel in the forge, and ravens bore messages to and fro. Saren wandered the corridors, always with Podrick or Mira at his side, occasionally with Bran. He observed everything with a quiet wonder, touching the stone walls as if trying to recall memories from another life. The courtyard fascinated him, the training yards, the old well, the godwood. The latter place drew him most of all. The godwood of Winterfell was a tranquil place surrounded by graceful trees that stood in silent vigil. At its heart was the weirwood, ancient and gnarled, its white bark carved with a solemn face. Bran would often sit beneath the tree, letting its roots speak to him through time. One day he guided Saren there. The man approached the heart tree with reverence. He brushed his fingers over the trunk, tracing the carved lines of the face. Bran felt a tremor pass through the weirwood as though it recognized a lost child of the north. Saren closed his eyes, and Bran sensed a subtle exchange between him and the old gods, a quiet communion. When Saren opened his eyes, tears glistened. He took a deep, shuddering breath. In halting words, mixing the old tongue and common, he uttered, "I remember snow, wolves, building, walls." His expression was distant. "Not the Great Wall, another, smaller, for the farm. Protect from winter storms. My father taught me." He looked at Bran, confusion and grief mingling in his gaze. "I was man? Had family?" Bran nodded, feeling empathy well up within him. "Yes," he whispered. "You did. And they live on in us." Saren's lips pressed into a thin line. He placed his palm flat against the weirwood again, as if seeking more. For a moment, Bran thought the old gods might grant him a glimpse, but the connection severed quickly, leaving Saren trembling. Perhaps his mind could only take so much at once. Perhaps the healing of such deep wounds was a slow process. But it was a start, a link to the humanity he had once known. Over the following weeks, Saren gained strength, physically and mentally. He walked the battlements, marveling at the vantage points overlooking the wintry expanse. He helped, in his quiet way, with small tasks around the courtyard, trying to repay the kindness of those who housed him. Most still saw him as odd or slow, not realizing the depth of the trauma he had endured. The rumors spread quickly. A strange man from beyond the wall, said to be a distant cousin of the Starks, who rarely spoke but was always near Bran or Mira or Podrick. Some whispered he had been a prisoner of the others and fled. Others claimed he was a wraith that Bran had brought back from the dead. Sansa and Arya did not openly deny any rumors but kept a watchful eye. They trusted Bran, but they wanted to be sure. If Saren was indeed free, no threat remained. If any darkness lingered, they would root it out. That was the Stark way. Yet no darkness manifested. Instead, over time, Saren even managed a small laugh when Podrick clumsily tried to teach him sword forms. His reflexes were surprisingly sharp, but the training staff felt alien in his hands, as if some part of him rebelled against the act of fighting. Arya took a turn sparring with him and found that while he had incredible reflexes, he refused to strike at her even in practice. He seemed almost afraid of violence, as though atoning for centuries spent as a being of pure destruction. Bran continued his role as the three-eyed raven, guiding Westeros whenever the realm called upon him. He was often lost in visions or presiding over council with Sansa, who sometimes asked him to verify the truth of certain matters across the kingdom. But each day, Bran made time to check on Saren, to speak with him, to watch him grow more comfortable in mortal skin. One evening, as a late spring snow fell softly on Winterfell, Bran found Saren gazing at the courtyard from one of the ramparts. The faint moonlight cast a silver sheen on the stones. Saren glanced at Bran's approach, then returned his gaze to the flakes swirling in the cold wind. For a while, they stood in companionable silence, the hush of the falling snow enveloping them. Then Saren spoke, his voice quiet. "I see the children laughing in the daytime," he said, pausing to find the right words. "They remind me of something lost. Something that was warm." Bran nodded, remembering the childhood he had shared with his siblings in this very courtyard, how they had once played with wooden swords and run among the towers. How that innocence was shattered by the events that followed, his fall, the war, the threat from beyond the wall. "We all lost a lot," he said gently. "But maybe now we can reclaim some of it." Saren turned his eyes to Bran, the hint of sorrow replaced by a spark of determination. "I want to help. I know not how," he said, stumbling over the words. "But I want to mend what was broken." The phrase struck Bran with its earnestness. The realm was indeed broken in many ways, recovering from wars both mortal and supernatural. Here stood a man who had once been the greatest threat to life, now longing to heal rather than harm. Bran believed that might be the greatest testament to the power of redemption. "You will find a way," Bran promised, placing a hand on Saren's shoulder. The days turned into weeks, and the north basked in a rare, gentle spring. Flowers bloomed in the meadows near Winterfell, and the new crops were planted. People tried to forget the horrors of the undead, though the memory lingered in nightmares. Occasionally, travelers still brought tales of small bands of whites wandering aimlessly, the last remnants of the Night King's fell power gradually being destroyed by local forces or simple disintegration. Saren listened with haunted eyes whenever he heard such stories, carrying a weight of guilt he could barely articulate. One afternoon, a raven arrived bearing a message for Bran. It seemed that on the eastern coast, near the Bight, fishermen had reported sightings of unnatural creatures, half-rotted corpses of the drowned stumbling onto shore. This was unexpected news. The others had never been said to command the seas. Concerned that some leftover magic still animated these drowned dead, Sansa asked if Bran would look into the matter. She knew he could use his green sight to confirm or deny the threat. But before Bran could attempt a vision, Saren approached. "I can help," he said, his brow furrowed. "Want to stop the dark?" Bran exchanged a glance with Sansa, considering. "There's risk," Bran said to Saren. "You might still have a connection to that power. I don't want to place you in harm's way." Saren's jaw tightened. "I will not stand by." His common tongue was improving. "If darkness remains, I must face it." Sansa studied him. She still bore caution, but she trusted Bran's assessment of Saren's changed nature. "Very well," she said. "I will send a small force to investigate. You may go with them if that is your wish." It was decided then. Arya volunteered to join, her restless spirit eager for a challenge. Mira wanted to ensure Saren's safety, and Podrick followed out of loyalty to both Bran and the Starks. Bran himself, limited by his condition and his duties, could not easily make the journey, but he promised to watch over them through the eyes of ravens if need be. That very night, in the stillness of the Godwood, Bran pulled Saren aside. "If you truly want to do this, you must be careful," Bran warned. "You might sense the pull of that old magic if whites are around. Don't let it consume you. Remember who you are. Remember that your name is Saren, that you're free." Saren bowed his head. "I will remember," he said solemnly. Then he raised his gaze to the weirwood's carved face. "No more winter that does not end," he whispered. "No more death." Bran laid a hand on his arm. "Go with the blessings of the old gods. This is the path you choose now." He did not say goodbye, for he felt certain this was only the beginning of a new chapter in Saren's story. At dawn, Arya, Mira, Podrick, and Saren set out with a dozen armed men on horseback. They carried provisions for weeks, intending to travel southeast to White Harbor and then along the coast. As they departed, Sansa and Bran stood atop the ramparts, watching them fade into the distance. A swirl of wind carried the sound of hooves echoing against stone and earth. "I hope we haven't made a terrible mistake," Sansa murmured, wrapping her cloak tighter around herself against the chill. "What if something stirs that part of him again?" Bran's eyes had that distant, knowing quality. "He is stronger now than you think," he said softly. "He wants to be free. Sometimes, wanting freedom is enough to fight the greatest darkness." Sansa studied her brother, then nodded. Though worry still lined her face, she knew she must trust Bran's judgment. For the first time in years, she allowed herself a small flicker of hope that Westeros might truly find peace and that old wounds could be healed, not just hidden. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. Bran fell into his routine of overseeing Winterfell's affairs alongside Sansa, walking the courtyard and dwelling in the Godswood to peer into the flows of time. Yet his thoughts often roamed to Saren and the group traveling east. Through the eyes of ravens, he occasionally glimpsed their progress, trotting along the King's Road, making camp in forest glades, passing the first fields outside White Harbor. He could not, and would not, intrude upon their every moment, for the cost to his own strength would be too great, and they needed to stand on their own. But he watched just enough to see that they were safe. For Saren, the journey was a test of everything he had become. Riding a horse was a new experience for him, but he adapted quickly. Arya watched him from beneath her hood, assessing, perhaps looking for any flicker of the monster she had once stabbed at Winterfell's Godswood. But all she saw was a man determined to learn, determined to do what he believed was right. Mira treated him with kindness, recalling their earlier travels. Podrick tried to share songs and stories around the campfire, and though Saren did not understand all the words, he often smiled faintly, especially at the bawdier tunes that made Arya roll her eyes. When they finally reached the coast, the air grew salty, and the endless hiss of waves against the shore replaced the rustle of forest leaves. The fishermen in the small villages near White Harbor greeted them respectfully, recognizing the presence of a Stark and a strong retinue. They spoke of missing villagers, of corpses washed ashore, and of unnatural lights glimmering offshore at night. Saren listened with rapt attention, occasionally rubbing at his chest, as if some old chill haunted him. Arya organized a patrol along the beach at dusk. They walked the pebbled shoreline with torches, stepping cautiously over driftwood. The wind whipped at their cloaks, carrying the tang of salt and something more foul. After an hour of searching, Mira spotted movement near a jagged rock formation. She signaled the others to approach quietly. Arya led the way with cat-like grace. Podrick followed, sword at the ready, and Saren walked behind them, his eyes scanning the shadows. What they found at the water's edge froze their blood. A cluster of drowned corpses stood half-submerged in the surf, their eyes a dull, bluish-white, reminiscent of whites. They moaned softly, flesh sloughing off waterlogged bones. The group had seen whites before, but never ones that rose from the sea. Arya and Podrick readied their weapons. Mira notched an arrow. Saren stood still, a trembling tension seizing him. Memories, unbidden, flickered in his mind. Commanding legions of undead, a silent army that marched at his bidding. The cold darkness that once was his domain threatened to surge through him. "No," he whispered, shutting his eyes, fighting the pull. "I am free." The drowned whites turned their milky gazes toward the intruders. With eerie slowness, they began to shuffle forward. One let out a gurgling moan that rose into a shriek. Arya sprang into action, slashing with the dagger that had once ended the Night King. She decapitated one white, sending its head rolling into the surf. Podrick jabbed with his sword, slicing limbs off another. Mira loosed arrow after arrow, each striking true. The whites were awkward and slow, but their numbers were unnerving. More emerged from the water, arms outstretched, jaws slack, as though drawn by some lingering malice. Saren clenched his fists. He could feel the faint echo of control he once wielded over such creatures, the latent bond that tethered whites to the White Walkers. Fear fluttered in his chest. He did not want that power, that vile connection. But the whites smelled something in him as well. They advanced toward him, ignoring the others at times. A spark of recognition flickered in their dead eyes, as if drawn to the presence of their former king. "Saren," Arya called, dispatching another white. "Fight them if you can. Help us." But Saren could not bring himself to raise a blade. Instead, he closed his eyes, reaching for a different power, the memory of warmth, of life, of the vow he made by the weirwood. No more winter that does not end. No more death. In the depths of his mind, a green spark flickered. Not the cold, icy power of the others, but something gleamed from his contact with the old gods, from Bran's healing, from the humanity he had reclaimed. He extended his hands toward the whites and focused every ounce of his will on severing the link that bound them to undead existence. The compulsion that once emanated from the Night King's magic might be undone by the equal and opposite force he now claimed. A faint glow, pale and warm, emanated from his hands, too subtle to be seen clearly in the darkness, but it illuminated his features with an ethereal quality. The whites hesitated, stumbling in confusion. Their moans became frantic, as though they sensed something unraveling. Arya and the others took advantage of their distraction. They hacked and slashed, cutting the whites down one by one. But it was Saren's effort that made their task easier. The whites grew sluggish, as though the malevolent energy animating them was fading. Finally, the last white collapsed into the surf, limbs going limp. The water washed over its remains, carrying bits of rotted flesh away. Silence fell, broken only by the restless waves. Saren dropped to his knees, breathing hard, sweat beading on his forehead. Mira ran to him, steadying him. Arya scanned the shore for any sign of more undead, while Podrick simply stood, sword in hand, chest heaving from exertion. The tide rolled in, erasing footprints and bloodstains in the sand. When Arya was certain the threat was gone, she turned to Saren, her voice hushed with awe. "What did you do?" "I broke the chain," he said, carefully forming the words. Their link to the dark ended. Mira looked at him with a mixture of relief and concern. "Are you all right?" Saren nodded, still panting. "I am free," he repeated, as if reassuring not only them, but himself. "And so are they." Arya slowly sheathed her dagger, gazing at Saren with a newfound respect. "Then let's be sure there aren't any others," she said. "We'll burn the corpses to be safe." They spent the night gathering driftwood and constructing pyres along the shore. The drowned whites, now utterly inert, were piled up and set aflame. The eerie sight of burning, rotted flesh flickered against the darkness, casting long shadows. Saren stood at the edge of the firelight, arms folded, his face solemn. Despite his exhaustion, he helped as best he could, hauling pieces of wood, ensuring every last corpse was destroyed. With that, whatever remnant of the great Other's hold remained in these waters was banished. Dawn broke, painting the sea in shades of gold and pink. The group watched the sun crest the horizon with weary gratitude. No more whites emerged from the deep. Word spread to the local fisherfolk that the danger was dealt with, and they hailed Arya and the others as heroes. Arya, however, gave credit to Saren, though she did not elaborate on his identity. The fishermen merely nodded, offering thanks and prayers to the old gods for delivering them from the unnatural menace. In the days that followed, Arya's group scouted the coastline, ensuring no further pockets of drowned whites remained. Saren repeated the ritual once more when they discovered a smaller band of corpses near the mouth of a river. Each time, he severed the link animating them, and Arya and Mira destroyed the bodies. The reek was horrific, but the relief from the villagers was immeasurable. When their task was done, they returned to Winterfell. Along the way, Arya caught Saren glancing at the scars on her arms from old battles. He asked, in his halting way, if she was afraid of anything. She smiled wryly and said, "I was afraid once, of the idea that some monsters can't be killed. But I've learned that everything has a weakness." Then she looked at him. "Even monsters can change, it seems." He lowered his eyes, a faint smile curving his lips. In that moment, they seemed to share a quiet understanding that he had been the greatest monster of all, and now he was doing everything in his power to undo the harm. In some sense, that made him a warrior just as much as Arya, if not more so. Their arrival at Winterfell was met with celebration. The news of the drowned whites had reached Sansa, and so had the news of their demise. She stood in the courtyard with Bran as Arya, Mira, Podrick, and Saren rode in. Cheers rose from the onlookers. Sansa approached Saren, scanning him as if looking for any sign of darkness. Instead, she saw a steady calm in his eyes. She leaned in and said softly, "I'm glad you made it back." Saren bowed his head in acknowledgement. He did not speak many words, but his gratitude was evident. Bran, wheeling forward in his chair, smiled at his friend and ancestor. "You've done well," Bran said. "The realm owes you a debt it can never repay." Saren let out a soft breath. "I do not seek reward," he said. "I only want to live to help." "That you shall," Sansa replied. Her voice was gentle but laced with the authority of a ruler. "Winterfell is your home, should you wish it." A sense of closure fell over them all. The courtyard buzzed with renewed energy, and servants rushed to stable the horses and offer warm meals. Arya dismounted, her grin rueful as she looked at Saren. "We should get some rest," she said. "I don't know about you, but I've had enough of corpses for a lifetime." Saren nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. Once he had been lord and master of death. Now he was content to set aside that burden. There was a profound sense of peace in knowing he had faced the shadows of his past and emerged victorious. He followed the others into the great hall, where tables groaned under the weight of ale, bread, and steaming meat pies. In the aftermath of the feast, Saren slipped away to the Godwood. It had become his sanctuary, the place where he felt closest to whatever humanity he once held. The weirwood's face regarded him with that same inscrutable calm. He knelt before it, placing his palms against its roots. Slowly, in a voice nearly lost to the gentle breeze, he spoke words in the old tongue, words that expressed thanks and contrition, words that, once upon a time, might have been prayers offered by the first men. Bran, emerging quietly from behind a tree, listened. He did not interrupt. When Saren finished, he looked up, noticing Bran. A faint blush crept into his cheeks, still unaccustomed to such vulnerability. Bran only smiled. "You're one of us," he said. "I've seen enough to know that for truth." Saren nodded. The burdens of countless centuries still weighed on him, but he was free to shape a new destiny, free to choose how he lived. He touched the base of the weirwood, feeling the cool texture of its bark. "I am Stark," he whispered as though affirming it for himself. Bran extended a hand. Saren rose and took it. They walked together beneath the interlacing branches, letting the quiet hush of the godwood envelop them. In that shared silence, the ghosts of the past found rest, and the promise of a gentler future glimmered. The next day and all the days after were theirs to shape. And for perhaps the first time since the creation of the White Walkers, the North felt a little less cold, a little less burdened by the looming dread of endless winter. And so the legend was rewritten. Where once the Night King stood as a fearsome specter of doom, the truth emerged that he had been a stark ancestor, twisted by ancient magic. He was healed, redeemed by the compassion and daring of Brandon Stark, the three-eyed raven. In time, Westeros would come to know of this story, though perhaps never fully believe it. Some would laugh at the idea that the great evil they faced was undone by a single act of grace. Others would take comfort in it, a reminder that even the darkest night could give way to dawn. But for Bran and the people of Winterfell, the memory of Saren standing beside them, free from the chains of the long night, was all the proof they needed that the old gods had not abandoned them and that hope, even in the cold heart of winter, could bloom anew. The snows came again, softly at first, dusting the courtyard of Winterfell like a gentle promise of the coming night. Dawn had barely broken, and already the clouds overhead gathered as if conspiring to smother the sun. A hush clung to the air, broken only by the distant shuffle of servants beginning their day's chores. The old keep's gray stones bore the weight of centuries, yet now, in this quieter era after the Great War, those stones sheltered peace as well as the undercurrent of new beginnings. Inside the godwood, the heart tree loomed with silent grace, its red leaves quivering in the cool breeze. Bran Stark and Saren stood beneath those branches, each reflecting upon their own transformation. Bran's cloak pooled around his chair, a subdued color that blended into the winter landscape, while Saren wore a simple wool tunic and cloak dyed in the shade of dark gray favored by House Stark. His skin remained pale as new fallen snow, yet color had returned to his cheeks over the months he'd spent in Winterfell. The lines of strain once etched into his brow had softened. The presence of the old gods seemed to hum quietly, a living force that had accepted him into its fold. For Bran, each passing day was a fragile triumph. When he used his green sight to peek into the swirl of time, the nightmares of the long night no longer dominated his visions. Instead, he witnessed the common people rebuilding barns and villages, sowing seeds in fields where the dead once walked. Ravens carried letters of good tidings between the north and the other regions of Westeros. Yet not all was well across the land. Reports trickled in of bandits roaming the riverlands and of freshly unsettled conflicts in the Iron Islands. Minor squabbles compared to the cataclysm they had all survived, but squabbles that could easily fester. A soft rustling of leaves drew Bran's attention. He turned his head just as Saren lowered himself to his knees by the heart tree's gnarled roots. Saren had no recollection of worshipping the old gods in his first life, those memories were as distant as starlight. But his new beginning rooted him here, in the shade of these ancient branches. Sometimes Bran sensed that the weirwood acknowledged Saren's presence with a kind of thoughtful neutrality, neither judging nor bestowing blessings, merely witnessing the story of a soul that had tasted both unimaginable power and unfathomable grief. Saren rested a hand against the bark, feeling the textured ridges. His gaze rose to the carved face, whose eyes bled with the eternal red sap. "It whispers sometimes," he said softly, turning to Bran, his common tongue accented by the old dialect he'd slowly relinquished. "But I can't make out the words." "You might never hear them clearly," Bran said. His own voice emerged from that curious space he occupied, neither child nor old man. "The old gods speak to us in ways we rarely understand with our ears. It's more a sense of belonging, or a warning, or a comfort." Saren exhaled, his breath fogging the air. "They saw me when I was that other thing." He hesitated, rarely speaking directly of his centuries bound as the Night King. "I always wondered why they never stopped me." Bran's milky eyes flickered with a hint of compassion. "Because the old gods aren't about control. They remember. They watch. They endure. They hold the echoes of the past so we might learn. But they won't break the will of men. Or of others. Even if that will is twisted by dark magic." Saren bowed his head, a lingering guilt twisting in his chest. "I was so lost." He murmured the words more to himself than to Bran. "And if not for you, I would still be." Bran placed a reassuring hand on Saren's shoulder. "You've walked a path none of us can fully comprehend," Bran said. "But each day you remain free of that darkness is a victory for all of us." Saren nodded and pushed himself to his feet. "I want to do more, though. It isn't enough to sit here, even if this is the place I call home. How do I prove to the rest of Westeros that I'm not a monster lurking in the shadows?" The question lingered in the cold air. Bran's expression grew pensive, a distant look that suggested he might already have glimpsed parts of that answer in his weirwood dreams. By living, he finally said. By helping where you can, as you've done already. In time, the whispers will fade. Some will always doubt, of course, human hearts are slow to trust what they once feared. But your deeds will speak for themselves. Saren drew the cloak tighter around him. I hope so, he said, though doubt rumbled through him like a far-off storm. They left the godwood soon after, making their way toward the great keep. This early in the morning, the corridors were quiet. Occasional servants scurried past, bobbing their heads respectfully at Bran and offering curious glances at Saren. Most recognized him now, especially after word spread of how he had helped destroy the drowned whites along the eastern coast. Whispers still followed him, old superstitions died hard, but no one shunned him openly. The Starks had embraced him, and so Winterfell's people followed suit. Warm torchlight gilded the stone walls as they entered the great hall. Long tables stood neatly arrayed, awaiting the midday meal. At one table sat Podrick Payne, clad in a light leather jerkin, whistling a jaunty tune under his breath as he inspected the edge of his sword. Nearby, Mira Reed sipped from a cup of steaming tea, her frog spear resting on the bench. Both looked up, smiling at the sight of Bran and Saren. Morning, Podrick said brightly, setting the blade aside. I was just about to join Mira for some practice in the courtyard. Will you be coming? Saren inclined his head. I'll watch if that's all right. I still haven't found it in me to fight as I once did. He paused, uneasy at the memory of wielding unimaginable power in battle. But I can learn to handle a blade the way mortals do. It might serve me someday. Excellent, Podrick replied, beaming. We can drill you in some basics. You've a good eye and reflexes, better than most new hands I've taught. Bran stayed behind, explaining that he had to meet with Sansa about a new matter of governance. With a nod of parting, Saren followed Podrick and Mira out to the courtyard. Snow still dusted the cobblestones, though stable boys had swept much of it away. The ring where northern soldiers practiced was half-frozen mud, scattered with straw targets. A handful of guards were already going through the motions of swordplay, stamping their feet to keep warm. Mira stretched her arms and squared off against Podrick, brandishing her frog spear in both hands. Are you ready, Sir Podrick? She teased, adopting the formal style people had taken to calling him since he'd been knighted. He grinned, drawing his sword. Never readier, Lady Reed. They circled each other warily, exchanging quick feints and parries. The clang of steel against spear tip echoed in the crisp air. Mira was agile, dancing lightly across the slippery ground, while Podrick used a more traditional stance, each block precise. Though he was no longer the gangly squire who once followed Brienne of Tarth, he still carried a humble air that belied his skill. Saren stood at the edge of the ring, eyes tracking their movements. He found himself unexpectedly transfixed by the artistry of it. Mortals had so many ways of fighting, angles of approach, footwork, cunning. When he'd led an army of whites, his approach had been nothing but brute force driven by an unholy magic. Now, seeing how humans measured each strike, how they anticipated movement, gave him a deeper appreciation for the complexities of mortal combat. Eventually, Podrick caught Mira off balance with a smooth pivot. He knocked aside her spear and stepped in, the flat of his blade tapping her shoulder. She laughed breathlessly, raising her hands. Yield, she said, then shot him a sly grin. Well done, Pod. You've been improving faster than ever. Saren approached as they ended their friendly spar. Podrick offered him a wooden practice sword. Care to join in? Saren studied it for a moment, curling his fingers around the hilt. It was heavier than it looked, though not impossibly so. He nodded. Yes. Show me. They began slowly, Podrick walking him through the simplest stances, how to brace his feet, how to keep his shoulders relaxed, how to move his wrist for a slash instead of locking his entire arm. The earlier attempts Saren had made in passing had been overshadowed by his reluctance to engage in violence of any sort. Now he let himself focus on form, step, breath. The hush of falling snow became a backdrop, the chatter of a few onlookers a distant hum. He tried a simple sequence, a forward slash, a step back, a parry. Podrick corrected his posture, tapping Saren's wrists gently to show him the needed angle. Mira watched, calling out occasional tips. The wooden swords clicked together in a rhythmic pattern that somehow soothed Saren's nerves. Here was an expression of skill that had nothing to do with raising an army of ice. It was control, discipline, and assertion of one's mortal will. A few passers-by stopped to watch. It wasn't every day they saw the quiet pale man, whom rumors still labeled as an ancient terror undone, participating in ordinary training. Even some of the guards paused their drills to cast curious glances. Saren felt self-conscious under their scrutiny, but he pushed through, reminding himself that he belonged to House Stark now. That belonging was a right he had earned through his redemption. After some time, the strain in his arms grew evident. He lowered the practice sword, panting lightly in the cold air, steam rising from his lips. Podrick gave him an encouraging smile. "Good progress," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "You've got the footwork down. We'll build from there." Saren offered a small smile in return. "Thank you," he said quietly, meaning more than just thanks for the lesson. The simple acceptance Podrick and Mira offered him was a constant balm to old guilt. Just then, a clamor rose near the front gates. Voices called out in confusion, and the sound of horses' hooves echoed across the courtyard. Mira and Podrick exchanged a glance, their practice stances forgotten. Saren tensed, glancing toward the main yard. Sometimes visitors arrived unexpectedly, but rarely with such a commotion. The three of them left the training ring, wooden swords in hand, and made their way past a group of startled onlookers. Through the swirling snow, they saw half a dozen riders clad in mottled cloaks of gray and black, bearing the sigils of the citadel upon small badges pinned to their garments. Their horses were lathered and tired, as though the riders had pushed them hard to reach Winterfell. One dismounted, pulling back his hood to reveal a gaunt face crowned by thinning hair. "What's going on?" Mira asked one of the guards. The guard shrugged. "They say they've come on urgent business from Old Town, something about unusual phenomena in the north. They asked to see Lady Sansa and Lord Bran at once." Saren felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. His first instinct was to wonder if word of him had reached the Citadel in some new form. He knew that Samwell Tarly, once a brother of the Night's Watch, had studied at the Citadel, but Sam was not the sort to dispatch an ominous envoy. That left the question, what did these scholars want? Mira touched Saren's arm, sensing his unease. "Let's find out," she said softly. They made their way inside, following the cluster of maesters and novices as they were shown into the great hall. Servants hustled to set out refreshments, though the visitors waved away food and drink, insisting their matters were urgent. Moments later, Sansa entered in her warm robes, flanked by Arya and Bran. The hush in the hall deepened. Saren hung back near one of the pillars, watching from a respectful distance. The leader of the Citadel party introduced himself as Maester Wilmere. His voice carried a clinical edge. "Lady Sansa, Lord Bran," he said, bowing stiffly. "We have traveled from Old Town with alarming news and with questions that we hope you can answer." Sansa inclined her head. "Speak, Maester. Winterfell welcomes those who come in peace." Wilmere exchanged a tense glance with one of his younger companions, who nodded encouragement. "We have noticed strange signs in the astronomy records," he began. "Events that do not align with the established cycles of our sky. The red comet that appeared before the wars, there have been anomalies in its predicted path since it vanished. Additionally, ravens from the eastern coast speak of phenomena we cannot fully explain, pockets of unnatural cold that appear, then dissipate. We suspect they might be remnants of the magic that animated the White Walkers." Bran's eyes flickered, but he said nothing yet, letting the Maester continue. Wilmere drew a shaky breath. "Furthermore, in the starry September of Old Town, there have been a series of visions reported by certain devout men and women, visions of a figure once called the Night King, wandering the land. Yet these visions do not depict him as the unstoppable foe we once feared, but rather as," he trailed off, looking uncertain, "as a penitent spirit working alongside men." At that, an unsettled murmur rippled through those assembled. Saren looked down, his heart pounding. The younger novices seemed reluctant to meet his gaze. But Wilmere squared his shoulders. "Given the Citadel's mission to preserve knowledge and protect the realm from ignorance, we cannot ignore such reports. We came here in the hope that Lord Bran's unique insights might clarify these matters. And if it is true that the Night King's power lingers, we must act to ensure it cannot endanger the realm again." Sansa took a measured breath, her composure unshaken. "Your concerns are valid, Maester," she said. "But know that the threat of the Night King has been ended. My brother and our allies destroyed him on the eve of the Long Night." Bran's calm voice interjected, "Ended in one sense, yes." He directed his gaze toward Saren, who stood tense and pale near the edge of the hall. "But magic in this world does not vanish so simply. It transforms." A ripple of anxiety ran through the Citadel party. One young novice adjusted his spectacles nervously. Another glanced toward Saren, as if suspecting who he might be. Maester Wilmere's gaze followed theirs, suspicion dawning. "Lord Bran," he said carefully, "is there something you wish to share?" "We have heard rumors, but rumors are seldom trustworthy." Bran flicked his eyes to Sansa, seeking permission. She gave a subtle nod, though her lips pressed into a thin line. She understood that once the secret left Winterfell, it would spread throughout the Seven Kingdoms and perhaps beyond. But the moment had come. Bran cleared his throat. "The man you see there," he said, gesturing gently toward Saren. once bore the identity you fear. He was the first White Walker, a Stark of the ancient days. He was twisted by the children of the forest's magic. We undid that enchantment and freed him. Gasps echoed through the chamber. One of the younger maesters almost dropped the ledger he was carrying. Wilmir's face turned ashen. His hand trembled on the hilt of a small purse attached to his belt, as though reaching for a hidden talisman. This cannot be," Wilmir stammered. "What you say, it defies every established record. The Night King was destroyed. He was—" Arya cut in, her voice carrying an edge. "I destroyed his body with a Valyrian steel dagger. But his soul, his being, survived in the magic that once bound him. My brother found that piece of him and brought him back as the man he originally was, free of the curse." Saren forced himself to remain calm, stepping forward. He inclined his head to the maesters. "I mean no harm," he said, his voice steady though laced with tension. "My name is Saren. I was a Stark countless generations ago. The old magic forced me into a role I did not choose." Wilmir swallowed, struggling to make sense of it. He glanced at Bran. "This is extraordinary. If true, it warrants meticulous study. The Citadel must know how such a thing was done. We must confirm that the threat is truly gone, and if so, how you have contained the power." Arya bristled at the word study, as though Saren were no more than an oddity to be dissected. Sansa spoke quickly, her tone firm. "The realm is no longer threatened by him. Saren has proven his desire to protect the living. He's more than once confronted the remnants of that dark power. If you doubt, look to the fishermen of the eastern coasts. Ask how he helped end the threat of drowned whites. But we cannot simply, Wilmir." He began. Then he hesitated under Sansa's steady gaze. Slowly he modulated his tone. "My apologies, Lady Sansa. We did not come to offend. We came to learn and safeguard. The realm has bled from the ignorance of the past. We do not wish to repeat such errors." Sansa regarded him levelly, then nodded. "You may remain in Winterfell as our guests. Lord Bran will share what he deems wise to share. But be aware, Saren is under our protection. He is family." The final phrase held weight, and every listener felt it. The Starks of Winterfell might be known for their fair dealings, but they were not to be challenged when it came to family. Maester Wilmir bowed. "We understand," he said. "We ask only for the opportunity to observe, to learn how the old magic might persist. And of course," he added with a thin smile, "we place ourselves at your disposal for any counsel you may require. The Citadel remains a friend to House Stark." Sansa dismissed the hall, instructing her stewards to escort the visitors to chambers in the keep. As the maesters departed, exchanging hushed whispers, the tension in the hall lingered. Arya let out a breath and shot Saren a glance that was half amusement, half concern. "You might become the realm's most studied curiosity," she said dryly, "if we're not careful." Saren managed a small, humorless chuckle. "I've been a far worse thing," he murmured. "If scrutiny is the price I pay for living free, I'll accept it." Bran, looking thoughtful, wheeled closer. "We should speak privately. If the Citadel is seeing signs of arcane disturbances, there may be other pockets of undead or other phenomena we haven't detected. Your presence might be even more crucial than we thought." They withdrew to one of the smaller side chambers off the Great Hall. The chamber was cozy, heated by a small hearth with tapestries depicting wolves in a forest. As soon as the door closed, Sansa turned to Bran. "You've seen something, haven't you?" Bran's face took on that distant cast. "Not as vividly as before. But yes, there are flickers of movement, small motes of darkness scattered across the land. Most vanish quickly, like sparks blown out by the wind. Some remain flickering." He looked to Saren. "You must feel it too. The leftover fragments of that magic." Saren closed his eyes, inhaling slowly. When he allowed himself to focus, he sometimes sensed faint pinpricks of something akin to howling emptiness. They were less frequent now than immediately after his own transformation back into a mortal, but each time it felt like a splinter in his mind, reminding him of the hold the great other once had. "Yes," he admitted, opening his eyes. "I do feel them at times, but I can't track them unless I'm close." Arya paced near the hearth. "The last thing we need is a new wave of whites cropping up across the realm. We're all just starting to rebuild." Sansa drew her fur-lined cloak tighter. "And how do we balance the Citadel's curiosity with the need to maintain order? People might panic if they think the others are returning." Bran laced his fingers together. I think we should allow the maesters to witness how Saren deals with remnants of that dark magic within reason. If the Citadel's records reflect that the threat is contained, it might reassure the realm. Besides, knowledge can help us. They may unearth texts we don't have. The children of the forest left behind precious little that we can interpret. Arya folded her arms. So you propose we bring them along on some sort of expedition? If we find another source of undead, let them watch Saren do his work. In essence, yes, Bran said quietly. Though we must remain cautious. We don't want them meddling in ways that could make matters worse. Sansa nodded thoughtfully. Agreed. We'll keep them under watch, but also show we have nothing to hide. It's the best course. People trust maesters. Their word will carry weight. Saren stood by, absorbing their words. The very thought of hunting down pockets of undead power chilled him. Yet if it had to be done, if it would safeguard the realm, he couldn't turn away. When do we leave? He asked. Bran's faint smile was tinged with sympathy. First, we need to find a suitable lead. Winter is not so harsh now, the roads are passable, but we can't wander the entire north hoping to stumble on a sign. Let me see what the Ravens and the Weirwoods can tell me. They parted with that plan in mind. Over the next week, the maesters of the Citadel settled uneasily into Winterfell's life. Some spent their time in the library, poring over old scrolls and ledgers. Others ventured into the courtyard to study the architecture of the fortress, taking notes on how the Starks kept their seat warm through the natural hot springs. They asked pointed questions about the events of the long night, scribbling down every account from knights, servants, and local small folk who'd lived through the siege. And always, they watched Saren from the corners of their eyes. He, for his part, tried to remain patient. If he passed a corridor and found two novices whispering, he pretended not to notice. If Maester Wilmere asked him to describe what it felt like to be reborn, Saren answered politely, mindful not to expose any vulnerabilities that might be exploited. A part of him felt naked under such scrutiny, but he reminded himself that these scholars could become allies if they understood the truth. Each day, Bran visited the Godwood to gaze into the Weirwood's red eyes, searching for glimpses of undead stirrings across the north. Every evening, he emerged with subtle shifts in his expression, though not always with concrete news. Time in the spiritual realm was never straightforward. Meanwhile, Arya took an active role in training new recruits to the Winterfell Guard, occasionally letting Saren join the sparring matches. He improved, though he never enjoyed the act of violence. After one session in which Arya knocked him down thrice before he managed a single feint, she offered him a hand to stand. "You're too timid," she said matter-of-factly. "You don't commit to the strike." Saren spat out a mouthful of melting snow, wiping his lip. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he admitted. Arya's expression softened. "I understand. But if you hesitate against a real enemy, you'll be the one who gets hurt, or the people you're trying to protect might fall. Better to learn proper control here than let your fear paralyze you when it matters." He nodded, his cheeks flushing. There was sense in her words, though the idea of plunging into combat still rattled him. But for all that, he recognized the truth: not all threats could be dispelled through magic alone, especially with his power so drastically changed. That night, as the wind rattled shutters and flurries drifted across the courtyard, Saren found himself alone in the library, a single lantern illuminating shelves upon shelves of tomes. Dust motes swirled in the candlelight. This sanctuary of knowledge comforted him. The silence allowed him to think without the weight of eyes upon him. He ran a finger along the spine of a leather-bound volume. The label read, "Legends of the Long Night." Opening it, he found accounts from the Age of Heroes, Bran the Builder, the Last Hero, the formation of the Night's Watch. Myths and half-truths blended together, painting the others as otherworldly demons. He swallowed, recalling that once he had been their progenitor, at least in part. Some stories mentioned the Night King as a Lord Commander of the Watch who had taken a strange pale bride. Others insisted he was a Bolton or an Umber. None said he was a Stark, though a few hinted at it in rumor. He turned page after page, searching for any mention of redemption, any possibility that the White Walkers could be anything other than pitiless. Unsurprisingly, he found none. Yet here he stood, living proof that the narrative could be changed. He closed the book with a soft thump. A polite cough startled him. Saren looked up to see one of the young novices from the Citadel, a tall, lanky lad named Rennick. The boy, hardly older than 17, clutched a scroll and looked at Saren with a mixture of awe and hesitation. "My apologies, sir. I didn't mean to disturb you," Rennick said quietly. Saren managed a reassuring smile. "You didn't." Rennick stepped forward, gaze flicking to the tome in Saren's hands. "Reading about the Long Night?" Saren inclined his head. "Yes. The stories seldom align, but it's fascinating to see how people have tried to explain those events. Rennick nodded, pushing his spectacles up his nose. It's all we had for centuries, rumors, songs, half-forgotten accounts. To think that you were part of it. It feels like living history in a sense. Saren closed the tome, hugging it loosely against his chest. Is that how you see me? A piece of history? The novice looked abashed. Forgive me if that sounds callous. It's just that we in the Citadel are taught to revere knowledge. To find someone who can shed light on ancient mysteries, it's hard not to let curiosity overwhelm politeness. Saren studied Rennick's wide eyes. Unlike some of the older maesters, the boy's curiosity seemed genuine, untainted by fear or ambition. I understand, Saren said. I'm not offended. Ask what you wish. Rennick drew a breath as though steeling himself. He lowered his voice. Is it painful? Knowing what you once did? What you were? A sudden tightness gripped Saren's chest. He glanced away, letting the question settle. Yes, he admitted quietly. A burden. I hurt so many without will or remorse because I was trapped in that monstrous shell. Even though I had no choice, it was still my hand that unleashed the long night. Rennick took a step closer, earnest sympathy in his gaze. I can't imagine bearing that. But from what I've seen, you've done everything you can to make amends. I know some of the senior maesters are wary, but he cleared his throat. I just wanted to say, if you ever wish to record your story in your own words, I'd be honored to help. So the future can see the truth, not just the legends. Saren blinked. He hadn't considered writing his story or dictating it. The thought unnerved him. Could the realm handle the unvarnished account of how the White Walkers were created? Yet the idea also carried a quiet appeal that future generations might read about how even the darkest nights could yield to hope. I'll think about it, he said gently. Rennick nodded and gave a small bow, then made his way to another shelf, searching for a book. Saren lingered a moment, the novice's words echoing in his mind. Maybe, just maybe, knowledge could truly be the path to acceptance for himself and for others. The next day brought news that answered Bran's search for a lead. A raven arrived from a mountain village near the Vale at the northeastern edges of the Mountains of the Moon, reporting corpses found with crystalline shards of ice embedded in their flesh. The local lord, unversed in the ways of the White Walkers, sought Winterfell's advice. The letter was terse, written by a bannerman who had once fought in the Great War. He feared a resurgence of the undead. Sansa and Bran conferred with the Citadel emissaries. It was agreed that a small party, including a few of the visiting maesters, would travel to the village to investigate. Bran could not make the trip himself. His mobility across treacherous terrain was limited and his responsibilities anchored him to Winterfell. But Arya volunteered, as did Mira and Podrick. The Citadel would send Maester Wilmyr and Rennick to observe. And, of course, Saren would go, for if undead magic lurked there, he alone might sever it. That evening, they made preparations. Arya packed weapons suitable for close combat, including dragonglass daggers. Podrick arranged for provisions. Sansa lent a protective cloak to Wilmyr, warning him that the mountain passes could be vicious. Rennick, though excited, was clearly nervous. Saren visited Bran one last time in the Godwood before departure. The weirwood's branches drooped under a thin veil of frost, icicles catching the moonlight. Bran gazed up at the carved face. I wish I could travel with you, he said, but the path wouldn't be easy for me, and I have other matters to oversee. I understand, Saren replied. You'll be with us in your own way. Bran nodded, his gaze distant. I'll keep watch through the ravens when I can, just as I did when you went to the eastern coast. But be wary, Saren. I sense the stirrings of something older, deeper, near those mountains. It may not be a simple matter of a few leftover whites. A quiet dread settled in Saren. Do you think the children of the forest left something there? I'm not sure, Bran said. But the Vale's high places hide many secrets. Go with caution and with the knowledge that no matter what you face, you're free to choose how you respond. Saren closed his eyes briefly, drawing strength from Bran's calm presence. Thank you. I won't forget. When dawn came, the expedition gathered in the courtyard. Horses pawed the ground, their breath puffing in the cold. Arya swung herself into the saddle of a sturdy mare. Mira adjusted the straps on her supply pack while Podrick double-checked his bedroll. Maester Wilmyr wore a heavy fur coat, the Citadel's link of chain links glinting at his neck, and Rennick sat nervously on a smaller gelding, the reins clutched in his gloved hands. Saren prepared to mount a gray horse that pawed the cobblestones. He felt an odd flutter in his stomach, remembering the last journey with Arya's band had ended in a confrontation with drowned whites. This might prove more dangerous, given the mountainous terrain and the uncertain nature of the threat. Sansa appeared at the steps, flanked by a few guards. She handed Arya a small sealed letter. Give this to Lord Royce if you pass through the gates of the moon, she instructed. He might offer aid if you need it. Arya slipped the letter into her pouch, nodding. We will. Sansa turned to Saren, her expression gentle. Watch over each other out there. And if the situation grows dire, remember that you can withdraw. Pride is no defense against the unknown. Saren bowed his head in gratitude. I will keep that in mind. With that, they set off, trotting out through the gates of Winterfell. The path south was familiar at first, passing farmland and rolling hills. But soon they turned eastward, crossing into rockier terrain. The snow-dusted peaks of the Mountains of the Moon loomed on the horizon, stark and imposing against the wintry sky. Villages nestled in the valleys, smoke curling from their chimneys. Once part of the Vale, these outskirts were known for their fierce independence. They rode for days, stopping at small inns or making camp. Maester Wilmere fretted about the condition of the roads, while Rennick busied himself taking copious notes on everything from local dialects to the coloration of winter birds. Arya remained vigilant, scanning the landscape for any sign of trouble. Mira often scouted ahead, her frog spear strapped to her back, silent as a shadow. Podrick took the rear, ensuring no one straggled. Saren found his thoughts divided between the responsibilities of the present and flashes of memory. Sometimes, the sight of mountains triggered fleeting glimpses of the ancient past, a time when the first men still roamed the land, forging alliances, warring with the children. He could almost recall standing on a ridgeline, wind in his hair, a banner bearing a wolf's head snapping behind him. Then the memory would fade, leaving him disoriented. On the fifth day, they left the established road and ventured deeper into a rocky pass. Frozen waterfalls clung to the cliffs and the wind sharpened. Their horses picked careful steps along the icy path. By twilight, they spotted the glow of lanterns from a small settlement perched near a ravine. Wooden palisades ringed a cluster of huts with a single stone hall at the center. Smoke rose in thin tendrils from scattered chimneys. That must be the place, Arya said, squinting against the dim light. We'll stay there tonight. As they approached, a guard hailed them from a watchtower. Arya identified herself as a Stark, and though the guard seemed wary, he opened the gates. Within, they found a cramped courtyard where a handful of villagers moved about, each face etched with a measure of fear. Several paused to stare at the newcomers. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed. One man, bearded and clad in battered armor, stepped forward. Who are you lot? He demanded, though not rudely. Arya introduced the group and mentioned they'd come in response to the letter about ice-laden corpses. Recognition lit the man's eyes. Ah, you're from Winterfell. Thank the gods. I'm Ser Avery, sworn to Lord Grafton. We're holding the bodies in the hall. Didn't know what else to do. He led them through the settlement to the stone hall, which was rudimentary, little more than a large, open space with a raised fireplace. In one corner, carefully wrapped in tarps, lay 3 corpses. The rancid smell hung heavy in the cold air, and Saren's stomach churned. Death was no stranger to him, but the unnerving sense that these bodies might harbor leftover magic set him on edge. Maester Wilmere frowned, drawing out a perfumed handkerchief to mask the stench. Rennick cringed and quickly set about prepping writing implements. Arya and Mira stood guard, while Podrick assisted the villagers in unwrapping one of the corpses. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary victim of exposure. The skin pale, limbs stiffened by rigor. But as they peeled back layers of cloth, a glimmer of something like hoarfrost clung to the flesh. Saren forced himself to step closer. Maester Wilmere prodded gently at the chest cavity with a slim rod. Remarkable, the maester said in a hushed voice. There are shards of ice embedded within the muscle tissue, almost as if grown there. Rennick scribbled notes furiously, his hand shaking. Does it move? He asked. Ser Avery shook his head. No. We found them on the outskirts, near the canyon. They were travelers, I think, no one from our village. We brought them here, fearing they might turn. Arya knelt, inspecting the shards with narrowed eyes. It's not the same as a white, she observed, glancing at Saren. I don't sense the chill in the air. Saren pressed a hand over the corpse's forehead. He felt a faint, lingering echo of the great other's presence, like a dying ember. Carefully, he closed his eyes, reaching inside himself for that kernel of power he'd learned to reshape. There's something, he murmured. Diminished, but let me see if I can banish it. He focused, just as he had done on the eastern shore. He pictured a gentle warmth, a wave of green energy akin to the old god's presence, washing through the remnants of that dark magic. A soft glow pulsed in his mind's eye. The shards of ice trembled, then began to melt, dripping onto the stone floor. In seconds, they vanished, leaving only water trailing from the corpse's open wounds. Saren opened his eyes, chest heaving slightly. Gone, he said. They were not fully whites. Just fragments of the old power clinging to them. Something must have infected them. Mira exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Podrick let out a low whistle. Rennick stared, transfixed, while Maester Wilmir whispered a quiet prayer to the seven. Arya straightened up. So there's something out there that caused this, she said. But they're not rising. We need to find the source. Ser Avery nodded grimly. We've sent scouts to the canyon, but a few returned half-frozen, babbling about strange lights in the crevices of the mountainside. One never came back. Arya's expression hardened. Show us the way at first light, she said. We'll go take a look. That night, they took shelter in the settlement, bedding down in the cramped hall. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the wooden shutters. Around the hearth, the party spoke quietly of what they faced. Wilmir seemed half terrified, half fascinated. Rennick's eyes shone with a scholar's thrill, but fear etched his features as well. Arya sharpened her dagger. Mira sat in stoic silence, her spear at her side. Saren found it hard to sleep. He kept seeing the corpse's ice-laden flesh. If some vestige of the Great Other's power thrived in these mountains, how strong might it be? Would his ability to dispel it suffice if it was more than just a leftover shard? Memories of the unstoppable might he'd once wielded haunted him. What if that echo beckoned him back to old ways? He forced himself to dismiss the thought he was free. And yet, freedom was a fragile gift. Dawn arrived in a white haze. Snow blanketed the ground and a weak sun struggled to pierce the clouds. A small band of villagers gathered at the gate to see them off. Ser Avery, true to his word, offered guides, two rugged men who knew the paths. With them, the group set out for the canyon. Horses struggled on the rocky slope, so they dismounted, leading the animals carefully. Crisp air stung their noses. The canyon entrance yawned between two jagged peaks, each crowned with stunted evergreens. The wind funneled through the gap, creating a low whistle that sounded almost like a moan. Even the seasoned villagers cast uneasy glances at the rocks, muttering about curses. Arya motioned for quiet, drawing her dagger in one hand. Saren felt a prickling sensation along his spine, the same feeling he'd had when near drowned whites, but sharper, more insistent. They ventured deeper, the walls rising steep on either side, streaked with patches of ice. In places, the canyon floor was slick, forcing them to tread with utmost care. The sun was hidden, replaced by an eerie twilight cast by the high walls. Occasionally, lumps of snow and ice tumbled from above, echoing like distant thunder. After nearly an hour, one of the villager guides halted abruptly, pointing ahead. A thin sheen of bluish light shimmered against the rock face. It wasn't sunlight or reflection, it pulsed and flickered like pale flames dancing behind stone. Arya gestured for silence and the group crept forward, hearts pounding. As they rounded a bend, the source came into view. A fissure in the canyon wall, partly collapsed, revealed a jagged opening into some hidden cavern. From within that dark maw came ghostly lights, weaving like ribbons of frozen fire. The air felt colder here, enough to bite through their cloaks. We never knew there was a cave, whispered one of the guides, his voice trembling. Probably opened up recently after a rock slide. Arya's breath frosted in front of her face as she spoke. We go in. She handed the reins of her horse to the villager. Stay here. If we're not back by nightfall, return to your village. The guides looked relieved at not having to enter, though they glanced nervously at each other. Arya, Podrick, Mira, Saren, and the two maesters dismounted, tethering their horses to a boulder. They approached the cave entrance, stepping over loose stones. The pulsing blue light spilled out, casting dancing shadows on the canyon floor. At the threshold, a wave of intense cold rolled over them. Their breath caught in their lungs. Maester Wilmir nearly stumbled, bracing himself against the rock. Saren closed his eyes, trying to sense the magic. It felt like the echo of 1,000 voices whispering in a void, the residue of the Great Other's domain. A memory, yes, but an alarmingly potent one. Cautiously, they entered. The cave's interior was lined with shards of ice that jutted from the walls like crystalline spears. The floor sloped downward, leading them deeper into the heart of the mountain. The pulsing glow seemed to emanate from somewhere below, as though each icy shard channeled a faint luminescence. Podrick ran a hand along the wall, wincing at the chill. Mira sniffed the air. Smells like damp and something else. Arya nodded, her eyes scanning every corner. Stay close. Don't let that light guide you off alone. Wilmir hesitated, glancing behind him. Rennick, though trembling, pressed on, determined not to miss this discovery. Remarkable, the younger novice whispered. I've never seen anything like it. The path leveled out, revealing a small chamber. In the center, an underground pool reflected the eerie blue light. Stalactites dangled from the ceiling like frozen teeth. At first, the cave seemed empty, save for the shimmering water. Then Saren's gaze caught movement on the far side, near a cluster of ice columns. He signaled to the others, pointing. Slowly, they circled the pool, weapons at the ready. As they drew closer, they saw what looked like bodies entwined in the ice. Human forms half emerged from the columns, their mouths open in silent horror. It was as though they had been caught in mid-scream, frozen in place. Rennick blanched, nearly dropping his quill. Wilmir's eyes went wide. Arya hissed a curse under her breath. Podrick stepped forward, raising his sword, but Mira placed a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. "They might already be gone," she said quietly. Saren touched one of the ice columns. An intense cold bit at his hand. He sensed the faint thrumming of residual magic, stronger than in the dead travelers they'd found. A sickening realization dawned. Whatever force lingered here had tried to claim these humans, burying them in living ice. Then the nearest body moved. Its head wrenched to one side, eyes locked on Saren with an unnatural intensity. An anguished moan echoed through the cavern, sending waves of dread through every heart present. The figure, still encased in ice up to the chest, struggled, shards cracking. Another figure twitched, then another. "Seven hells," Podrick breathed, taking a step back. Arya brandished her dagger. "Are they whites?" Saren felt an immediate tug in his chest, that old pull of the great other's will. But it was not as strong as before. These poor souls were in the grip of something incomplete, perhaps an attempt to transform them into some new breed of undead. The question was whether they could be saved. He steadied himself, focusing on that quiet current of warmth inside him. If he could break this magic. Carefully, he pressed his palms against the column in front of him, ignoring the stinging cold. "Try to free them," he said over his shoulder. "But be careful." Arya and Mira took up positions around the columns, looking for any safe way to chip at the ice. Podrick stood guard. Maester Wilmir hovered by Rennick, watching with rapt, fearful fascination. Saren closed his eyes, letting the green warmth flow from his core. He envisioned roots digging through frost, a gentle but unyielding power. Under his hands, the ice quivered. Cracks appeared, faint lines spiderwebbing across the surface. A pained cry tore from the trapped figure as though the magic was woven into living nerves. Saren pressed harder, channeling more of that healing force. In a rush, the ice shattered. Chunks clattered onto the cavern floor, dissolving into streams of water. The freed body lurched forward, collapsing into Saren's arms. He lowered it gently, seeing that it was a man in ragged furs, lips blue, skin drained of color. He trembled violently, a keening sound escaping him. Saren sensed the aftershock of the dark magic in the man's flesh. Carefully, he placed a hand on the man's forehead, letting the last vestiges of that unholy grip dissolve. All around, the others repeated the process. Arya used her Valyrian steel dagger to carve a line in the ice while Saren's power loosened it from within. Mira broke down another column with her spear, chipping carefully so as not to injure the occupant. Podrick offered immediate assistance whenever a column began to crumble, catching limp forms before they hit the ground too hard. Some of the trapped were already gone, their hearts stopped long ago. Others clung to life by a thread. The air filled with sobs and coughing as the newly freed souls gulped in the frigid air. Arya and Podrick rummaged for blankets, pressing them on those who still breathed. Wilmir hurried over to check pulses, his training in healing overshadowing his earlier fear. Rennick watched in wide-eyed shock, struggling to record the events while also helping distribute what little medical supplies they carried. Saren made his way to one final column, within which a woman stared dully, her arms pinned. A swirl of ice clung to her neck like a twisted collar. He recognized in her eyes the same tortured awareness he'd seen in the drowned whites, as though part of her was consumed by the great other's presence. He steeled himself, pressing his palms to the ice. But this time, the ice didn't give so easily. The woman's lips parted, releasing a breath that crystallized in the air. She gazed directly at Saren, a slow, sad recognition dawning. Her voice, when it emerged, sounded layered, two tones, one her own, one something far older. "You do not belong here," she rasped. Saren's heart thumped. He sensed that the great other's echo was far stronger in her. "Let her go," he said, his voice shaking. "I command it." A twisted laugh resonated in the hollow space. "Command?" the layered voice asked. "You were forged to be the vessel of winter's wrath. You have betrayed it. You have turned away from what you are." Arya approached, hearing the exchange, brandishing her dagger. Saren raised a hand to stop her. He had to do this carefully. The magic was entangled in the woman's essence. If he simply shattered the ice, it might kill her. Summoning the wellspring of warmth again, he poured it into the column. The woman snarled, her eyes glowing faintly blue. Ice crawled up Saren's arms, biting through his sleeves. It felt like a war between two forces. The old winter power that once commanded him, and the new bond he'd forged with the old gods. He gritted his teeth, refusing to yield. The woman's breath came in ragged gasps. You would deny your nature, your birthright. The great other will never let you go. I am free, Saren ground out. He let his mind travel back to that moment in the land of always winter when Bran's chanting had shattered the hold of the children's obsidian blade. He remembered the swirl of weirwood leaves, the acceptance in Bran's eyes, and the unconditional compassion that had let him reclaim his humanity. Bolstered by that memory, Saren pushed the warmth deeper, imagining it flooding the woman's body. The swirling chill around her neck flared, then cracked. She shrieked, a sound that reverberated in the caverns. In a sudden burst, the ice shattered. The woman collapsed, steam rising from her skin. Saren stumbled backward, arms numb with cold. Arya caught him before he fell. The woman coughed violently, curling into a ball on the wet stone floor. When Arya knelt beside her, the woman's eyes opened, pale and wide. They were no longer blue, just a dull gray. She moaned, her lips trembling, and fell unconscious. Saren breathed heavily, shaking out the pins and needles sensation in his fingers. He glanced at Arya, who nodded. She's alive, Arya confirmed. The rest of the cave stood silent now, the other columns destroyed, the freed survivors cradled by the group's meager supply of blankets. Mira and Podrick conferred with Wilmir, who frantically checked pulses and dispensed instructions to Rennick to brew some herbal mixture for the worst cases. The swirling glow in the ice had dimmed significantly, as though a malevolent presence had retreated. Saren stared at the empty spaces where the columns once stood, guilt gnawing at him. This was another manifestation of the power he had helped bring into the world. Even centuries later, it refused to die quietly. But he also felt relief, having wrested these souls from that fate. Exhaustion weighed on him like lead. He sank to his knees, ignoring the chill of the stone. One by one, the others carried the survivors out into the open air. Arya came back for him, pressing a firm hand to his shoulder. We need to leave, she said gently. The air in here is too cold for anyone, especially them. He nodded, letting her help him to his feet. They stumbled out of the cavern into the gray light of midday. The guides rushed forward, shock written on their faces as they saw half a dozen half-dead survivors being helped along. The entire party was shaking from the cold, though Arya, Podrick, and Mira managed better than the older maester or the novices. Ser Avery, who had come up the path to meet them, gasped. Gods be good, what happened in there? Arya patted his arm. We found them trapped in ice columns, some foul magic, she said. They'll need warmth and care. We'll take them back to the village. The scene became one of frantic activity. Horses carried the weakest survivors, wrapped in blankets. Podrick and Mira led the way down the slope, while Arya, Saren, and the maesters walked behind, keeping pace with those who could move on their own. Already, a few of the survivors had regained enough lucidity to mumble about being ambushed by cold creatures in the canyon. Others were silent, eyes hollow. Saren trudged onward, numbness radiating from his hands up to his elbows. His confrontation with that stronger presence had drained him. Yet he knew they couldn't linger. The group needed to reach shelter before dark. As they descended, Rennick fell in beside Saren. The novice's face was a mixture of horror and exhilaration. That was beyond anything in the records, he whispered. What you did with your hands, that glow. Saren managed a weary shrug. I did what had to be done. Rennick's gaze flickered with awe. If the Citadel sees that you're using some form of old god magic to counter the Great Other, they might reconsider everything we thought we knew about the White Walkers. The balance of powers, he trailed off, realizing Saren was too exhausted for an academic treatise at the moment. Apologies, he said softly. We'll talk more later. They reached the settlement near dusk. Villagers bustled around, clearing space in the hall for the survivors. A local healer brought hot broth and poultices. Fires roared in every hearth to chase away the bone-deep chill. Maester Wilmir directed the villagers with surprising competence, ordering them to rub the survivors' hands and feet gently to restore circulation, to feed them liquids in small sips. Some would certainly lose fingers or toes to frostbite, but at least they were alive. Saren hovered by the fireplace, his own hands outstretched to the flames. The numbness lingered, a reminder of how close that malignant force had come to seizing hold. Arya joined him, her expression concerned. Are you all right? He nodded, not entirely certain. Just tired. That woman, it spoke through her. It recognized me. It said I had betrayed it. Arya's jaw tightened. You owe that power nothing, she said. You did the right thing. And you saved lives today. Saren's eyes flicked to the survivors huddled under blankets. One or two turned grateful looks his way. Others seemed too traumatized to notice him. Maybe, he said softly, but I'm afraid these incidents will keep happening. Arya took a moment to answer. Then we keep stopping them. Before Saren could respond, Maester Wilmere approached wearing a cautious smile. It appears that most of the survivors will pull through, he said, adjusting his chain. Thanks in large part to your intervention. Once they're stable, I'd like to document their accounts, how they came to be trapped in that cavern. This knowledge might help us identify where else such power could manifest. Of course, Saren replied. Despite his weariness, he recognized the value in learning all they could. Over the following days, they remained in the settlement, tending to the survivors. Several were huntsmen or travelers who had been caught in a sudden storm near the canyon. One recalled seeing shapes in the snow, pale, silent figures that lured them toward the fissure. Another claimed to have heard a voice in his mind calling him to embrace the winter. As word spread through the settlement, the folk began to realize that Saren's presence had been key to breaking the ice columns. Some approached him shyly to offer thanks. Others recoiled, spooked by rumors that he himself was once a creature of ice. Arya and Podrick stepped in when necessary to quell talk of demonry. Eventually, a day came when the survivors were well enough to travel or at least remain under the watchful care of Ser Avery and the local healer. Arya, Mira, Podrick, and the Maesters decided it was time to head back to Winterfell. They'd seen enough to confirm that pockets of undead magic remained active in remote corners of the land and that Saren had the power to dispel them. On the morning of departure, the air was crisp but clear, offering them a smoother journey. Villagers gathered at the gate once more, expressing gratitude mixed with lingering unease. Ser Avery clasped Arya's hand firmly. If you or the Starks need anything, you have friends here, he said. Then he turned to Saren. Whatever people say about your past, you saved folks from a fate worse than death. That's what matters. Saren inclined his head, feeling a spark of hope. They set off into the mountains, winding back through passes now familiar. The forced marches had taken their toll, but a sense of accomplishment buoyed the party. Riding at a measured pace, Arya fell in beside Saren. You found your purpose, she said, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. You might not like the memories it stirs, but you're the one who can stop this. No one else can. Saren nodded slowly. I feel it too. Yet I wonder if it'll ever truly end. What if the great other's presence lingers as long as the old gods do? Arya tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. If it does, then we keep fighting. That's the cost of living, isn't it? Always more battles. Behind them, Mira listened quietly, a thoughtful set to her mouth. Podrick hummed a soft tune under his breath, perhaps to steady his nerves. Maester Wilmere and Rennick exchanged theories about how the cave's ice had formed. Rennick's voice rose, excitedly detailing how the magic might have seeped into geological faults, while Wilmere offered caution about leaping to conclusions. They descended from the mountains after several days, crossing rolling hills until the familiar silhouette of Winterfell's ramparts came into sight. Snow still blanketed the courtyard, but smoke rose invitingly from the chimneys. Servants rushed out to greet them, and soon word spread that the expedition had returned. Sansa and Bran were waiting in the Great Hall. Once the party warmed themselves by the fire, Sansa insisted on a full report. Arya recounted the discovery of the ice columns, the half-living captives, and how Saren had freed them. Bran listened intently, his posture tense. I saw flashes of that cavern in my dreams, he said quietly. I tried to see deeper, but something blocked me. A reflection of the great other's will, Saren replied. It recognized me, called me a betrayer. Sansa's knuckles whitened on the arm of her chair. So this threat is real. Not just leftover white shamble. ING aimlessly. Some intelligence behind it, or at least some echo of it. Bran nodded. It doesn't have a physical body as the Night King once did, but it can still exert influence, shape pockets of ice-laden corpses. And it seems to be searching, perhaps for a new vessel. If it finds one strong enough. He didn't finish the sentence, but no one missed the implication. A hush fell in the hall. The memory of unstoppable hordes still loomed fresh enough to make hearts race. Arya cleared her throat, her voice firm. We won't let that happen. We have Saren. He can cleanse these pockets when we find them. Saren, though bolstered by her confidence, felt the weight of the entire realm pressing on his shoulders. If more such pockets existed, scattered who knew where, he might spend the rest of his life chasing them. Still, if that was what it took, he would not shirk it. He nodded once, a silent vow. Sansa looked to the Citadel representatives. Maester Wilmere, will you confirm in your official records that Saren is not a threat, that he is actively protecting the realm? Wilmere dipped his head in acknowledgement. Yes, Lady Stark. I have witnessed it myself. I will write a full account so the Archmasters may weigh it, though I doubt any will reject the evidence of my own eyes. Rennick's face shone with eagerness. And I'll help. This is the discovery of a lifetime. It could change our understanding of everything that transpired. The realm deserves the truth. A warm glow of relief spread through Sansa's features. Then let us share that truth. The Northern Lords, especially, need reassurance that we have the situation in hand. I'll send ravens across the region. If they see or hear anything resembling these phenomena, they'll report immediately. Bran's voice was gentle. We should also consider forging alliances beyond the north. This is a matter for all of Westeros. If the Great Other seeks a foothold anywhere else. A faint tension flickered in Sansa's eyes. She recalled the difficulties of uniting the realm even against the blatant threat of the undead army. Now, with the war over and people returning to their own concerns, forging alliances might prove no simpler. Still, she nodded. You're right. We can't stay isolated. Thus began a new phase for House Stark. Letters flew to the Lords of the Vale, the Riverlands, the Reach, even King's Landing, wherever influence might help them watch for unnatural cold. The Citadel's party prepared to depart, eager to return to Old Town and begin compiling their testament to Saren's role. Rennick asked if he might remain, but Maester Wilmere insisted they both return to ensure the Archmasters could question them thoroughly. They promised to come back eventually, or at least to keep in close correspondence. During those busy days of farewells and planning, Saren found himself hailed in the corridors by new arrivals. Messengers from lords who sought an audience, knights who'd heard rumors of a cold mage sworn to House Stark. Though many of them bowed courteously, Saren read the caution in their eyes. He accepted the stares without complaint, resolved to prove his worth by deeds rather than words. Amid these changes, a letter arrived from White Harbor. Lord Manderley reported that ships from the Iron Islands had been sighted near the coast, possibly raiding or exploring. Tensions in the aftermath of the wars still ran high. Sansa dispatched a small force to investigate, but it underlined how precarious stability remained. One crisp morning, as Saren walked the battlements, watching the pale sun climb, he noticed Arya approaching. Her breath formed tiny clouds in the chill air. She joined him at the parapet, gazing out across the fields where patches of green poked through the thinning snow. The realm's quiet now, at least compared to the war, she said, resting her elbows on the stone ledge. But it feels like we're standing on the edge of something bigger. Saren nodded, the wind ruffling his hair. The Great Other's echo might be subtle, but it's persistent. And beyond that, I sense there are other changes afoot. Arya's lips curved in a faint smile. You have the look of someone who sees shadows in the distance. He considered her words, letting them sink in. It's more that I sense that old powers never truly vanished. The children, the dragons, the night that doesn't end, these are all parts of a tapestry. I wonder if a new story is beginning, one in which the magic of the old world merges with the realm of men. If so, we must ensure it doesn't lead to disaster. Arya turned her head to study his face. You speak like Bran. A small laugh escaped him. Perhaps. He's taught me so much. They stood in comfortable silence, the gentle hush of the wind their only companion. Then Arya said, Bran told me I might journey south again soon to see if we can gather more knowledge from the Citadel and maybe from whoever sits the throne in King's Landing, though I doubt they'll be thrilled to hear more tales of undead. Saren folded his arms. You're going to leave Winterfell? For a time, she said. I'm no lady of the court. I prefer to move to discover. And the realm might need watchers. Maybe you should come with me. Seeing is believing, and if we find illusions or hints of the Great Other abroad, your presence could break them. Surprise flickered in Saren's eyes. He hadn't considered leaving the north for any length of time. This was his home and a fortress of safety for him. Yet perhaps the fight truly lay out there, across the broader land. I would consider it, he admitted. But let me speak with Bran and Sansa. I don't want to abandon the north if it still needs me. Arya nodded. Of course. No rush. We still have some time before the roads fully open after the last snows melt. With that, she turned and made her way back down the ramparts, leaving Saren alone to the swirl of thoughts in his mind. The wind caressed his cheeks, carrying the distant howls of dire wolves, a faint echo from the forest. He breathed in the crisp air, letting it invigorate him. Each day, he rediscovered what it meant to be alive, simple things like warmth from a fire, the taste of fresh bread, the loyalty of friends. If the cost of keeping that life was to spend his days unraveling the remnants of the great other's magic, he would pay it gladly. The weeks that followed were a lull of sorts, a chance for Winterfell to consolidate its efforts. Scouts were sent to the far northern reaches beyond the wall to see if any pockets of the old terror lurked there. Word came back of a few deserted wildling camps, but no major sightings of whites. Some free folk still roamed those icy wastes, forging a life away from southern rule. Bran's occasional visions suggested the magic was fainter in those parts now, perhaps due to the final dissolution of the White Walkers' forces. Meanwhile, Saren continued training in the yard. He'd taken Arya's advice to heart, working on controlling his hesitation in mock combat. With each passing day, he grew more adept at defending himself, though he never relished the idea of harming anyone. Podrick praised him for his discipline, and Mira teased him, saying he wielded a wooden sword with more grace than some knights did with steel. One crisp evening, after a long day of drills and counsel, Saren found himself once more in the library, drawn by a desire to understand. He thought of Rennick's offer to record his story. Perhaps he could begin by writing a few lines, though he wasn't sure how to put ancient memories into words. He settled at a small desk lit by a candle, parchment spread before him. At first, the quill hovered, dripping ink onto the paper. What words could possibly capture the centuries he'd spent as a creature of ice and death? He began tentatively. I was a Stark once in an age when the first men walked free of foreign influence. The nib scratched on the parchment. He paused, recalling that day near the neck, the clang of iron swords in the distance, the songs of wolves. My father taught me to build walls of stone to keep out the worst of winter storms. I never imagined I would become a storm myself. The door creaked, and he glanced up to see Bran in the doorway, quietly observing. Writing your memories? Bran asked, wheeling closer. Saren set the quill aside. Trying to. It's harder than I expected. The past feels like a dream or someone else's life. The details blur together. Bran nodded, folding his hands in his lap. Memories are tricky. Even I, with all my visions, can't claim to see them exactly as they were. But you don't need perfect clarity. Write what you feel, what you believe is important. Let the rest remain lost if it must. A fragile sigh escaped Saren's lips. What if the real truth is that I was never entirely good, even before the children changed me? What if some part of me was always cold? Bran looked steadily at him, a quiet compassion in his eyes. All men have darkness in them, just as all men have light. The children's magic took your worst potential and amplified it, caging your soul in that monstrous shell. But if there wasn't good in you to begin with, you wouldn't be sitting here now free. Saren felt a rush of gratitude. Perhaps the weight of that question would never fully leave him, but Bran's words offered a gentler perspective. He dipped the quill again, scribbling a few more lines. Bran watched in silence, content to let Saren find his own pace. They remained there a while, the soft scratch of quill on parchment melding with the crackle of the fireplace. Over time, the text took shape, a raw, incomplete testament, but a start nonetheless. Saren wrote of the confusion he felt as the magic overtook him, the centuries of emptiness, the final battle at Winterfell, and the moment he felt the dagger's bite. He didn't yet know how to articulate the time after that, how Bran's power reached into the void and plucked him from oblivion. But he would try eventually. When he set the quill down at last, his hand ached. Bran placed a gentle hand atop his. You've taken a bold step, he said softly. Saren gave a faint nod. I suppose it's easier to face whites than to face my own history. A smile tugged at Bran's lips. But you're doing both, aren't you? The candle had nearly burned down, leaving the library in deep shadow. They agreed to continue another time, blowing out the flame and departing. As Saren emerged into the corridor, he felt a strange lightness in his chest. Sharing his story felt like clearing a path through old, tangled brambles. Maybe he could help others understand and in doing so, free himself further from the shackles of shame. Outside, the moon glowed through thin clouds. He paused in the courtyard, exhaling a plume of frosty breath. The hush of Winterfell at night reminded him of the crypts beneath the castle where the old kings of the north lay in eternal repose. Once, legends said, the statues kept vigil so the dead Starks would protect the realm from darkness. He wondered if those ancient kings and queens ever foresaw a day when one of their own would become the greatest horror in the world, then be liberated from that fate. Perhaps the old gods had a sense of irony. Or perhaps the North itself, in its quiet watchfulness, had always known that winter held secrets far more complex than men's tales allowed. The next morning, Sansa convened a council in the Great Hall. She'd received letters from various lords acknowledging her warnings about pockets of undead magic. Some expressed skepticism, some offered to coordinate scouts, and a few politely refused to waste resources chasing rumors. The news from King's Landing was that the Crown had little interest in phantom threats, focusing instead on rebuilding the capital. That means we're largely on our own, Arya summarized, leaning back in her chair. As usual. Sansa tapped her fingers on the tabletop. We have enough alliances to keep watchful eyes across the north and some of the riverlands. If the Great Other's echo stirs in the south, we might have to rely on the Citadel to warn us. Or we send outriders ourselves. Bran inclined his head. And so we continue, vigil after vigil. Saren said nothing, but he could feel the tension in the air. The victory over the others had come at such a cost. People yearned for rest, for peace. Yet here they were, forced to maintain an unrelenting guard, uncertain if or when the Great Other might attempt a resurgence. After the council, Arya found Saren in a side corridor. You've heard the news. Most of Westeros doesn't think it's worth the trouble. Some lords are already dismissing it as northern superstition. Saren nodded. So we do what we can. She pursed her lips. Bran said we might glean more from the Citadel in Old Town or even from beyond Westeros. There are places across the sea where magic is rumored to linger, from Ass High to the Shadowlands. Maybe this echo could spread or find a foothold there. He considered her words, an uneasy stir in his chest. It was one thing to roam the north, dispelling pockets of ice magic, but crossing the narrow sea to delve into the unknown was another matter entirely. Yet if the threat was truly universal, maybe that was where they had to go. And you're thinking about going? Arya nodded. I've never been afraid to travel. I want to see how broad this threat might be before it lands on our shores unchallenged. Saren brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, his thoughts churning. I promised Sansa and Bran I would remain to protect the north. But you're right. We shouldn't be blind to the rest of the world. Arya's expression was unreadable. You belong here, I know. But sometimes the best way to protect home is to go far afield, meet threats before they arrive. He exhaled. Let me think on it. Over the next few weeks, as winter slowly eased, Arya made tentative plans for a southern and possibly overseas journey. She spoke with merchants from the free cities who passed through White Harbor, gleaning bits of rumor about magical lore or strange happenings across the sea. She studied maps, discussing safe routes and potential allies. Saren, meanwhile, continued to assist with the Watchers in the north. Reports of minor hauntings or odd cold spots surfaced occasionally, but none as severe as the canyon incident. Each time, either Saren or a dispatched party of loyal knights carrying dragonglass would investigate. The land was quiet, though not at ease. One evening, after a routine day in which Sansa handled local disputes over grazing rights and Bran communed with the Weirwoods, a raven arrived bearing the seal of the Lord of Raventree Hall. House Blackwood reported a strange phenomenon in their godwood. The ravens themselves seemed agitated, forming patterns in the sky at night. Locals claimed they heard faint whispers as if the trees were speaking in human tongues. Bran and Saren pored over the letter, trying to decipher the meaning. The rumor might have been exaggeration, but the detail about ravens in flight sets Bran's senses on edge. The last time the ravens behaved oddly, Bran recalled, it was before the Battle of Winterfell, when the Night King's approach disrupted their natural habits. Saren rubbed the back of his neck. Could it be an echo of that presence? Or something else entirely? Bran frowned. Hard to say without seeing it ourselves. He paused, then looked at Saren with a calm resolution. I can't go gallivanting across the Riverlands, but you can. Take a small party to Raventree Hall. See if this phenomenon is tied to the Great Other, or if it's merely local folklore. Saren agreed, though an undercurrent of weariness threaded through him. Another journey, another confrontation with unknown magic. Yet he had chosen this path. And if it helped the realm, so be it. Arya opted to join him, delaying her planned voyage south. Mira volunteered as well, citing her knowledge of how to navigate waterways. Raventree Hall sat near the Red Fork of the Trident. Podrick, ever loyal, gathered supplies. Within days, they rode out once more, leaving Sansa and Bran to govern the north. The journey south took longer than expected, for spring thaws turned roads to mud. They joined a caravan of traders heading toward the Trident, passing through villages that still showed scars from the war with the dead. Charred ruins dotted the landscape here and there, though many had begun rebuilding. Children watched them ride by, sometimes calling out blessings to the Starks. At last, they reached Raventree Hall, seat of House Blackwood. The fortress was known for its ancient weirwood tree, the legendary raven tree from which the house took its name. As the group approached, they saw the silhouette of that weirwood towering over the castle walls, a massive trunk of bone-white bark, branches like twisted arms. Dozens of ravens circled overhead, cawing. Lord Blackwood, a tall man with dark hair, greeted them in the courtyard. His expression carried a mixture of relief and lingering fear. "I'm thankful you came," he said, ushering them inside. "My people grow anxious. The ravens have been gathering in greater numbers than ever, flying in strange formations at dusk. The old weirwood groans at night. Some claim the face carved in it changes expression." Arya exchanged a meaningful look with Saren. "Have there been any signs of ice magic or undead?" Lord Blackwood shook his head. "No. The nights are warmer now, but the air in the Godwood, you'll feel it. It's charged with something. I feared it might be a sign of another dark power rising." They settled in the castle, taking a quick meal before venturing to see the famed Raven Tree at dusk. The fortress's walls opened onto a sprawling Godwood, at the heart of which stood the monstrous weirwood, its trunk thick as a 100-year-old oak. Countless ravens perched among the branches, their eyes glinting in the dim light. Their collective cawing created a cacophony that resonated through the air. Saren sensed a thrumming under his feet, like a faint pulse in the ground. He closed his eyes, letting his awareness sink into the old god's power. Waves of memory rose, but they were chaotic, as if multiple voices spoke at once. The ravens overhead seemed almost frantic, darting from branch to branch, forming swirling shapes in the sky. Mira edged closer, spear in hand. "This is unsettling. Have you ever seen anything like it?" Arya scanned the branches. "We have ravens in Winterfell's Godwood, but nothing of the scale." Podrick stood guard, while Saren stepped forward, placing a hand on the ancient bark. A jolt coursed through him, as though the tree itself recognized him. He tried to calm his breathing, focusing on the sense of presence he felt. Then he caught an echo, words forming in his mind. "Broken, searching, the shadows stir. Night's memory lingers." His heart pounded. He knew that the weirwood spoke in cryptic fragments, reflections of what they witnessed across time. "There's something here," he murmured to Arya. "Something about the memory of the night. It's almost as if this tree is holding on to the echoes of that war and can't release them." Lord Blackwood stood a short distance away, looking worried. "Is it dangerous?" Saren shook his head. "Not in the same way as the pockets of undead. This feels more like a wound in the weirwood network. Perhaps from the time the Night King's magic spread so far." Arya pursed her lips. "Is that wound something we can heal?" Saren let his fingers trace the carved face on the trunk. The wood was ridged and old, older than any man-made structure here. "I might try," he said, "but it's not the same as dispelling undead. This is a matter of helping the weirwood let go of the trauma. Bran once told me that the old gods carry the memory of all that happens before them. Sometimes, if the memory is too terrible, it can fester." Mira placed a hand on Saren's shoulder. "We'll stand guard. Do what you must." He nodded, turning back to the tree. The ravens fluttered overhead, screeching as if protesting his interference. Saren drew a steady breath, closing his eyes, letting his mind sink into that green realm where weirwood roots connected like veins through the land. He sensed a swirl of images, the long night, the armies of the dead, the chilling presence of the great other overshadowing the fields. Then came the memory of the final battle at Winterfell, the clang of swords, the roar of dragons, the moment of the Night King's demise. The weirwood had witnessed it in its own way through the network of living memory. "It's over," Saren whispered, as though speaking directly to the old gods. "He is gone. I am free. Let the land heal." In the depths of his mind, a voice responded, not in words, but in a feeling of shifting roots and sighing branches. He channeled his gentle warmth again, not an act of exorcism, but an invitation to release pain. Slowly, the ravens quieted, their cawing diminishing to uneasy murmurs. The presence within the trunk shuddered, as though contending with old nightmares. A surge of sorrow washed over Saren, sorrow for the countless lives lost, for the horrors wrought. He steadied himself, letting tears fall, acknowledging the grief. He silently asked the old gods to release this memory, to preserve it as knowledge rather than a living wound. Time seemed to stretch. The watchers around him stirred, uncertain. The sky deepened into purple twilight, dotted with early stars. Finally, the tension in the air lessened, the pulse underfoot subsiding. The ravens, as if by some silent cue, took flight, swirling above the tree in one grand circle before dispersing into smaller flocks. Some soared off beyond the walls, others settled in calmer roosts. Saren exhaled shakily, drawing back from the trunk. A wave of fatigue threatened to buckle his legs. Arya caught him, supporting him with a steady arm. "Easy," she murmured. Lord Blackwood approached, eyes wide. "You've quieted them. The tree, it looks different. Indeed, the old face carved into the trunk seemed less contorted, the grain of the wood softer in the flickering torchlight. Saren brushed his hand along the bark. "I think it's finished grieving," he said quietly. "At least here, the memory won't be an open wound." Podrick let out a relieved breath. Mira lowered her spear. Arya helped Saren remain upright. The group made their way back into the castle where they shared the news. Lord Blackwood expressed deep gratitude, promising to house them comfortably as long as they wished. That night, as Saren lay in a chamber provided by the Blackwoods, he couldn't shake the sense that healing the Weirwood was a different kind of victory, one for the land itself, beyond simply saving mortal lives. There was more to his role than hunting down remnants of undead. Perhaps he was also meant to mend the scars left on the natural world by the ancient conflict. But how many scars remained scattered across Westeros and beyond? The next morning, a stable boy burst into the courtyard while Arya and Mira were discussing travel routes. The boy breathlessly announced that a strange traveler had arrived at the gate, demanding to speak with the Stark who was once made of ice. A ripple of alarm went through the castle staff. Arya frowned, beckoning Saren. They hurried to the gate, where a tall woman wrapped in a cloak of dark feathers stood. Her hair was silver gray, her face lined with age, yet her posture was straight, and her eyes shone with uncanny vitality. She leaned on a staff carved with twisting runes. Lord Blackwood's guards kept a respectful distance, though they watched her warily. When Saren approached, she inclined her head in greeting. "You are he," she said in a low, resonant voice. "The one who was Night King and is now freed. I have heard whispers on the wind." Arya exchanged a look with Mira, both tense. Saren held the stranger's gaze. "That's me, yes? Who are you?" "I am Aldous, once of the children's lorekeepers," she said. "A hedge witch, some would say. I have studied old runes and walked the secret paths. I felt the stirring of ice in these mountains. I followed it and found you." A hush settled around them. The mention of the children's lore stirred immediate curiosity in Saren. "Why search for me?" he asked. Aldous let out a slow breath, her eyes roving over him as though assessing his spirit. "Because the old powers are not yet spent. You stand at a crossroads, half touched by the great other, half claimed by the old gods. Forces gather in places unseen, yearning for a new prophet of death. I came to warn you, or to guide you if you would be guided." Arya bristled at the cryptic talk. "We've had enough riddles. If you have information, speak plainly." Aldous regarded Arya with a faint smile. "I have traveled in the Shadowlands beyond Sky. I've seen shapes in the gloom, echoes of the same cold power that once animated the White Walkers. Others across the sea investigate such power. Warlocks, Shadowbinders, those who crave dominion. They sense a vacancy left by the Night King's demise. Some might seek to claim it." Saren felt a twisting in his gut. He remembered Arya's suggestion that the threat could spread beyond Westeros if the Great Other found new footholds. "Are you saying they want to become the next Night King? Or Night Queen?" Aldous said. "Such distinctions matter little to the darkest powers. The Great Other has no preference, only hunger." Mira's knuckles turned white on her spear. "And you want Saren to do what? Journey across the sea to stop them?" Aldous shrugged. "Perhaps that is your choice. I came only to warn you that the Echo does not remain solely in these lands. If you are wise, you will guard not just against pockets of undead, but also against those who would harness the power for themselves. If a mortal gains command of that winter magic, they could remake the world in ice as the Night King once sought to do." Saren swallowed hard. The final puzzle piece fell into place, explaining the persistent sense of an unending conflict. The war for the Dawn might have ended in Westeros, but the Great Other's essence might still roam, seeking a new champion. Arya's gaze flicked to Saren. "You see why I wanted to look farther than the north?" He nodded, his mind spinning. "Yes." Aldous offered a solemn bow. "I have delivered my message. My path leads on. May the old gods guide you." She stepped back, turning toward the gate. "Wait," Arya called, stepping forward. "Is there anything else we should know?" The hedge witch paused, not turning back. "Only that the chains you broke can be reforged if you are not vigilant. Be wary, Iceborn." She directed the warning at Saren, then left through the gate, disappearing into the early morning light. A weighty silence lingered. Lord Blackwood cleared his throat, glancing between them. "Well, that's not ominous at all." Arya sheathed the dagger she'd been gripping in frustration. Mira shook her head. "We have enough on our plate without chasing rumors to the ends of the earth." Saren stared at the gate, the witch's words echoing in his mind. "Yet we can't ignore it," he said softly. "If the Great Other truly has devotees beyond the sea, they could stir up a new threat. And if they learned of me, they might try to draw me back in or destroy me." Arya's lips thinned. "Let them try. We'll show them what it means to face House Stark." But beneath her bravado, her eyes carried a deep concern. They convened in Raventree Hall to discuss the next move. Arya, always inclined to direct action, proposed that once they returned to Winterfell, she would set sail from White Harbor for Essos, investigating potential leads in the Free Cities or beyond. Saren wrestled with the idea of accompanying her. The notion of stepping foot in foreign lands teeming with unknown powers made him uneasy, but the alternative was leaving Arya to face it alone. "I can handle myself," Arya insisted when he voiced concern. "But I won't turn down help. You've more reason than anyone to stop the Great Other's resurgence." Mira said she would remain in Westeros, helping Podrick and others track any leftover whites. "We can't abandon the North entirely," she pointed out. "Bran will need eyes on the ground, not just ravens in the sky." Lord Blackwood offered the courtesy of his hall as long as they wished to stay, but Arya decided they should head back north with their new knowledge. Every day they delayed was a day the Great Other's devotees might grow in strength. Thus, they departed Raventree Hall. The journey was marked by anxious conversation about the possibility of venturing across the narrow sea. As they neared Winterfell, Arya reminded Saren that ultimately the choice was his. "No one will force you to go. You have every right to stay here, guard our home." He gazed at the horizon, seeing the spires of Winterfell in the distance. "Home," he murmured. "For so long, I never dreamed I'd have a home again. But if leaving it for a while means protecting it from afar, then maybe that's what I must do." Arya's expression softened. "We stand a better chance together." They rode into Winterfell in the fading light, greeted by the bustling courtyard. Sansa and Bran awaited them in the great hall, warm fires crackling. After hearing the news of the Raventree's wound, the hedge witch's warning, Sansa rubbed her temples. "It never ends," she muttered. "We had our moment of peace, now this." Bran's expression was resolute. "We must be proactive this time. We won't wait for the darkness to gather and cross the sea to our shores." They deliberated late into the night, and in the end, a plan formed. Arya would lead an expedition to Essos under the guise of simple travel or mercantile exploration, but in truth seeking out any signs of those who might harness the Great Other's power. Saren, after much thought, would join her. The rest of House Stark, along with the loyal forces of the North, would remain vigilant in Westeros. Bran and Sansa would coordinate with the Citadel, ensuring they had support if needed. At dawn, Saren made his way to the crypts under Winterfell alone. Descending the steps, he felt the cool air envelop him. Torchlight flickered on the stone faces of old Stark kings and lords, their statues resting above sealed tombs. 1,000 years of history lay here, men and women who had borne the name Stark. He paused before a statue whose face had worn away with age, the name lost in time. For all he knew, that could have been his own direct father from so long ago. Or it could have been some distant cousin. It hardly mattered. The Starks of the crypts all carried the same quiet dignity. "I was one of you," Saren whispered. "Perhaps I still am. I never wanted to leave, to be parted from my kin." His voice echoed softly. "But I will go because I refuse to let our land suffer. I refuse to let the shadow of the Great Other fall again." Somewhere above, he heard the faint shuffle of footsteps, likely a guard or a servant. But down here, the silence felt profound, almost comforting. He closed his eyes, imagining that the old kings heard him, that they offered their silent blessing. When he emerged from the crypts, he felt the stirrings of resolve within him. He went to find Arya, who was packing her gear for the southern journey to White Harbor. "I'm coming with you," he said simply. She looked up, a flicker of relief crossing her face before she nodded. "Good." In the days that followed, they readied for departure. Sansa prepared letters of introduction to potential contacts in Bravos, Pentos, and other cities. Bran provided guidance gleaned from his ravens, warning them where the roads and sea lanes might be treacherous. Mira and Podrick took on leadership roles in the North's new network for investigating residual threats. At last, the morning arrived when Arya and Saren would depart. They stood in Winterfell's courtyard, horses laden with supplies, a few loyal retainers prepared to escort them to White Harbor. Snow fell in soft flurries as though bidding them farewell in the only language the North knew. Sansa embraced her sister tightly. "Return safely," she whispered. "And if you find trouble you can't handle, send word. We'll come." Arya gave a wry smile. "I always find trouble, Sansa. But I'll manage." Bran faced Saren. "Keep your heart open," he said. "You have the gift to heal as well as to fight. Don't let the Great Other twist you ever again." Saren bowed his head. "I won't. Thank you for everything." A hush fell as they mounted their horses. Ghost, Jon's old dire wolf, emerged from the shadows of the courtyard, watching them depart with a silent, lupin gaze. Saren felt a pang, remembering how Ghost had once guarded him. Now, the wolf seemed content to remain at Winterfell. The gate swung open and Arya spurred her horse forward. Saren followed, a swirl of mixed emotions churning within. The wind caught his cloak, reminding him of the long roads ahead, roads that might lead beyond Westeros entirely into lands where new perils and ancient magic lurked. He glanced back one last time at Winterfell, the ancestral seat of House Stark. Under Sansa and Bran's steady guidance, it stood resilient, a beacon of hope in a world still bearing scars. Then he faced forward, heart hammering with equal parts fear and determination. Because in spite of all that had happened, in spite of the horrors he had once embodied and the ghosts that still haunted him, he was alive. And in that life, he found purpose, protecting the realm he had once helped terrorize, forging alliances, healing old wounds. If that meant journeying across the narrow sea to ensure no new Night King or Queen could rise, then he would do it without hesitation. And so they rode out the north at their backs, the unknown future before them. Each hoofbeat carried them further from the land that had reclaimed Saren as a Stark and closer to the secrets that lay across the ocean. The wind whispered through the trees as though bidding them farewell and good fortune. Somewhere, in the swirling dance of time and fate, the old gods watched and the great others' echo waited. Yet Saren no longer feared the call of that darkness. He had chosen his side, and for as long as breath filled his lungs, he would stand against the winter that never ends. And stand always for the living. They reached White Harbor under low, heavy clouds that threatened a spring rain. The route from Winterfell had taken them through rolling hills and wide, muddy roads, a journey made easier by the slow but steady thaw that had begun softening the north's frozen earth. Fields and meadows, though still brown from long winter, hinted at new life stirring beneath the surface. In every village they passed, curious faces peered from windows and doorways at the sight of Arya Stark and her small retinue. Some recognized Saren by reputation, whispering that he was the pale man who once was something else. Others simply bowed respectfully and carried on, acknowledging the Stark banners that fluttered on the horses' saddles. For Arya, returning to White Harbor felt oddly nostalgic. She recalled the last time she'd come here, years past, when the North had still been shattered by war. Now, the city's grand walls stood fully repaired, the port bustling with ships that bore the merman sigil of House Manderley or the varied flags of merchants from across the narrow sea. Market stalls crowded the streets, offering salted fish, clay pots, bright ribbons, and exotic spices. The tang of salt air and fish oil hung heavy as she guided her horse through the throngs at a measured pace. Saren rode alongside her, absorbing the sights with quiet fascination. Though he'd traveled with the living for some time now, each new place reminded him just how vast the world was beyond the lonely ice and the memory of the long night. At the city gates, the guards recognized Arya immediately, bowing and waving them through. Lord Manderley's men stood by, having received a raven from Winterfell announcing their arrival. They escorted the travelers through winding streets of gray stone until they reached the Manderley seat, a grand keep flanked by towers that overlooked the harbor. Arya and Saren dismounted under the watchful gaze of the local steward, a slender man with a thin mustache named Terold, who stepped forward to greet them. His manner was polite, if guarded. "We've prepared chambers in the guest wing," Terold said. "Lord Manderley regrets he cannot greet you personally at this very moment. He's overseeing a dispute at the docks, something about fishermen's rights and new taxes on foreign goods. But he'll be eager to see you at supper time." Arya nodded her thanks. "We appreciate the hospitality. We'll need a ship that can carry us to the free cities. If Lord Manderley can recommend a trusted captain, that would help." Terold bowed. "I'll relay the request. He has many ties to merchants and sailors. You'll have no trouble finding a vessel, but to find a trustworthy one, that's another matter entirely. Please follow me." They handed off their horses to stable hands and followed Terold into the keep. The polished floors shone under torchlight, tapestries depicting mermaids and whales hanging along the corridors. Saren noticed how each tapestry showcased the city's strong ties to the sea. He could almost sense the brine in the very walls. Everything felt alive here, from the swirl of servants rushing about to the distant cry of gulls in the harbor. It struck him that his time as the Night King had been spent in utter silence, no commerce, no chatter, no mundane squabbles. Now, the everyday bustle of mortal life felt oddly precious. After settling in their rooms, they took some time to wash away the dust of travel. Arya changed into simpler leathers, more suited to moving among crowds unnoticed. Saren, unsure of how to dress in a port city, wore a dark gray tunic and trousers Sansa had provided, embroidered subtly with the Stark dire wolf near the collar. He had grown more comfortable in such clothing, though he still felt a pang when remembering how, in ages past, he might have worn furs and leathers reminiscent of the first men. Time was a river that carried him along, never pausing. Near midday, they ventured into White Harbor's streets, wanting to see the docks for themselves. Seabirds swooped overhead, screeching as they dove for scraps. Sailors bustled around loading and unloading cargo while fishmongers advertised their catches. The clamor was immense. At one pier, a Bravosi caravel was moored, its purple sails furled. Farther down, a Pentoshi galley with carved serpents along its prow brought murmurs of curiosity from onlookers. One local fisherman, recognizing Arya's face, doffed his cap and pointed toward a tall, broad-shouldered man overseeing the unloading of crates. "That's Captain Brego," the fisherman said helpfully. "He's rumored to deal fairly, though his tongue's sharper than a gull's beak. If you're looking for passage across the narrow sea, you could do worse." Arya thanked him and headed in that direction, Saren at her side. They found Captain Brego barking orders at his crew. He wore a salt-stained coat and a battered trickhorn, his face weathered by years of open water. He noticed them approaching but continued directing the men until a set of crates was securely moved. Only then did he give Arya a nod. "Stark, aren't you?" he asked, eyeing the direwolf pin on Arya's cloak. "I've done a run or two for your brother in the past, delivering goods from White Harbor up to the new castles in the north. Don't think I've met you, though." "My name is Arya," she replied, straightforward. "This is Saren. We're looking for passage to Bravos or possibly Pentos, depending on the route. Would you be willing to discuss terms?" Brego's gaze flicked to Saren, curiosity lighting his gray eyes. "Never known a Stark to travel with, well, anyone quite so pale. You look half a ghost." "No offense meant." Saren, who had grown accustomed to such remarks, merely inclined his head. "None taken." "Come aboard," Brego said with a shrug. "We can talk in my cabin. Just don't mind the smell. Had to haul barrels of pickled herring across from the sisters last week. Seems the stink never fully leaves." Inside the cabin, the reek of fish mingled with the musty damp of old timbers. A single lantern cast jittery shadows on the walls. Brego poured himself a cup of watered ale and offered them some. Arya accepted, Saren politely declined. Then the captain dropped into a creaking chair. "What's your business across the sea?" he asked bluntly. "Pardon me for prying, but I like to know if I'm ferrying smugglers, diplomats, or runaways." "No offense meant, just covering my hide." Arya gave him a wry smile. "We're no smugglers. And we're not exactly diplomats. We're searching for old contacts of the Starks, you might say. A personal matter." She didn't elaborate on the Great Other or the threat of undead magic. Brego's eyebrows rose. "Fair enough, but I'll expect coin for the crossing. Storms are common this time of year, and the Bravosi tariffs keep rising. I can drop anchor in Bravos for a time, or if you prefer Pentos, we can discuss a separate rate." Arya glanced at Saren, who offered no particular preference. "Bravos first," she decided. "I've been there before. I know a few places we can start searching for what we need. From there, if we must go on, we'll see." "How soon can you sail?" Brego spread his hands. "Within the week, if the weather holds. Got to finish unloading this cargo, take on fresh supplies, let the crew have a night or two of rest. Coin up front, half now, half upon arrival." They agreed to meet in the Manderley Keep to finalize details with Lord Manderley's steward present, which would grant the arrangement some added security. As they stepped off the gangplank, Saren noticed that the bustle of the docks seemed to revolve around these foreign ships, each hauling goods or passengers from distant lands. He realized their quest might extend far beyond the horizon he'd known. It wasn't just about the north or even Westeros now. The Great Other's shadow had grown longer than that. That evening, they dined with Lord Manderley in his vast hall overlooking the water. Servants scurried between tables laden with roast fish, fresh bread, and a variety of soups. Lord Manderley himself, a large, jovial man with a neatly trimmed gray beard, greeted Arya warmly, recalling how her family once treated with his house during troubled times. "You're always welcome here," he said, raising a cup of spiced wine. "It was House Stark that saved us from the Whites. We remember." Arya inclined her head graciously. "Thank you, my lord. We'll be leaving soon for Bravos. Captain Brego might be our best bet for safe passage, though if you know another captain you trust more." Manderley chuckled. "Brego's as trustworthy as a sell sail can be. Not the easiest man to chat with, but he's rarely late or sloppy. I'd warn you only that the waters east of Bravos can be unpredictable in spring. Watch for storms. And keep your valuables well hidden. The crews sometimes get ideas when they reach foreign ports." Arya nodded while Saren sipped at his water, quietly taking in the banquet. He felt an odd sense of displacement. Not long ago, he'd sat in the great hall at Winterfell, overshadowed by the memory of what he'd been. Now he was in a lord's hall by the sea, preparing to cross to new lands. Everything in his life moved so swiftly, yet he couldn't deny the stirring of anticipation in his gut. If the Great Other threatened these lands, he had to be there to confront it. After the meal, Lord Manderley asked them for news of Winterfell. Arya spoke of Sansa's efforts to manage the realm, the small pockets of leftover undead magic that Saren had helped dispel, and the uncertain rumblings from across the sea. Manderley listened gravely. "I heard from passing sailors that some in Essos still talk of dragons," he said. "Larger dragons than those that survived the wars here, or so the rumors claim. I don't put much stock in tall tales, but I know you Starks have seen enough wonders for a lifetime. If you do encounter such things, may the gods be with you." In the days leading up to their departure, Arya and Saren made their final preparations. Word arrived from Winterfell, a raven bearing good wishes and additional letters of safe passage. They also received an unexpected note from the Citadel. Maester Wilmere reported that the Archmesters had been skeptical of his accounts regarding Saren, but that a few were intrigued enough to keep lines of communication open. Rennick, the young novice, had begun drafting a treatise on the post-war remnants of the Great Other's influence, though it would take time for the Citadel to formally acknowledge any of it. At last, the morning of embarkation arrived. The sky glowed a gentle pearl gray and a light wind ruffled the harbor waters. Captain Brego's ship, the Sea Razor, stood ready at the docks, sails reefed, crew loading barrels of fresh water and salted provisions. Brego himself greeted Arya and Saren with a curt nod, leading them aboard. Arya insisted on paying the first half of their agreed-upon sum in good silver coins entrusted to a small coffer that Brego stored in his cabin. Saren kept close watch, noticing how the captain locked the chest with 2 separate keys, one for himself, one for his first mate. The man might be rough around the edges, but he clearly had procedures for safety. They set sail with the tide. White Harbor's walls shrank behind them, the city diminishing to a haze of spires and rooftops. Overhead, gulls wheeled in noisy arcs, then peeled away to pursue easier scraps closer to shore. The Sea Razor cut through the waves with surprising agility, her timbers creaking in a steady rhythm. Soon, the open sea spread before them, vast and unpredictable. For Saren, the rolling of the deck took getting used to. He had never experienced sea travel while mortal, the motion unsettled his stomach. Arya watched with mild amusement as he gripped the railing, breathing carefully. "You'll find your sea legs in time," she said, offering him a stick of ginger root from a small pouch. "Chew on this if you feel sick. A ship is no stable courtyard, but trust me, it's a means of freedom unlike any other." He nodded, letting the tang of the ginger settle his queasiness. The brine-scented air whipped around them, stinging his cheeks with salt. Each day, he learned a bit more about the ship's routine, how the crew took shifts, how they scanned the horizon for sails or storms, how to catch favorable winds. He rarely spoke with the sailors, who eyed him warily, but he observed them with quiet respect. Arya spent time on the quarterdeck conferring with Brego about course corrections. She had been to Bravos before, and though the captain had his own charts, Arya's memory offered additional insight into channels and hidden reefs. During idle moments, she practiced with her sword, needle, in the open space near the forecastle, ignoring the sideways stares from a few deckhands who'd never seen a woman so comfortably wielding a blade. Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the western horizon, Saren found himself alone at the ship's prow, gazing at the expanse of water that glimmered like molten gold in the dying light. A swirl of memory came unbidden. Ages passed, a storm-lashed coast under dark skies, the hiss of freezing waves as the White Walkers advanced. Had he, in that monstrous shape, ever stood by a frozen shore, gazing out over the same sea? If so, he remembered little more than flickers of bleak ice. The present world felt infinitely warmer, more alive. Yet as he leaned on the railing, he sensed something at the edge of his mind, a faint cold presence that made the hair on his arms rise. He closed his eyes, letting his awareness expand. It wasn't the Great Other itself, just a subtle disquiet and echo. Perhaps it was only his lingering paranoia. Shaking off the feeling, he reminded himself that their course lay far from the land of always winter. This was the domain of sailors, not whites. The voyage passed without major incident for the first several days. They skirted the rocky coastline near the Bight, then angled southeast. The wind proved cooperative, pushing them along at a decent pace. Arya recounted stories of her time in Bravos, from her training with the faceless men to her meager existence scraping by on the streets, though she spared some details that were too personal. Saren listened intently, marveling at how each path she'd taken had shaped her into the skilled, resolute person she was now. Occasionally, distant ships appeared on the horizon, merchant galleys or fishing vessels from the free cities. No pirate banners were sighted, much to Brego's relief. They dined on hard bread, salted fish, and dried fruits, supplemented by the cook's attempts at stew using the limited fresh ingredients. Water was rationed carefully, and each day the crew said small prayers to the gods, some to the seven, others to the drowned god, or to a scattering of foreign deities. For his part, Saren felt the quiet presence of the old gods in his heart. Even here at sea, the weirwoods did not claim the oceans, but he carried their memory within him. Roughly 1 week after leaving White Harbor, they approached the coast of Bravos. A thick fog clung to the waves in the early dawn, obscuring the fabled titan that guarded the harbor. Saren peered into the mist, seeing only vague shapes of rocky islets. Gradually, as the sun rose, the colossal statue of the titan materialized, a looming figure carved from gray stone, its massive features stern and eternal. Beneath it stretched the wide lagoon that formed the outer harbor of Bravos, dotted with countless small craft moving to and fro. Captain Brego navigated the Sea Razor with care, flashing credentials to the Bravosi patrol ships that came alongside. The lagoon gave way to the arsenal, then the labyrinth of canals for which Bravos was famed. Stately domes and slender towers rose into view, each structure melding art with function. Saren's eyes widened at the city's grandeur. The slender spires, the colonnades fronting marble buildings, the intricate bridges linking the maze of islands. Bravos was a place of wealth and cunning, of music and blades, of secrets both whispered and shouted. Arya stood at the railing, expression unreadable. This city held a bittersweet place in her past. She had come here broken and grieving, seeking refuge among the faceless men. She had left it as someone else, though ultimately still Arya Stark. Now she returned, older and with a new purpose, to stop a threat that few in Bravos would even believe existed. The Sea Razor docked at a busy quay in the Purple Harbor district. Crews in green vests stood ready to help moor the ship, though Brego barked that his own men would handle it. A swirl of portside chaos enveloped them. Cargo being hauled ashore, customs officials asking questions in the rapid Bravosi tongue, street vendors hawking pastries or grilled fish, a swirl of odors from saffron to brine. Arya stepped onto the quay with practiced ease, while Saren followed more cautiously, scanning the surroundings. Captain Brego clapped them on the shoulder. "We'll be here a fortnight, maybe more, if the cargo sells well and we can find fresh commissions. If you want to sail on to Pentos, you know where to find me, though I can't promise I'll wait forever." He eyed Arya. "Safe travels, my lady." "Thank you, Captain," she said. Then, in a lowered voice, she added, "Watch your coin purses. Bravos is rich, but thieves are everywhere." Brego grinned. "I prefer honest deals, but if a thief tries to cut me, he'll find a blade in his own ribs. Fare you well." With that, he returned to the ship, leaving Arya and Saren to arrange lodging. Neither wanted to stay in the more expensive quarters near the Sea Lord's palace, so they picked a modest inn called the Shifting Mists, situated along a side canal. The proprietor, an elderly Bravosi woman, gave them 2 small rooms on the upper floor. The ceilings were low, but the place was clean, with warm hearths and decent bread. After stashing their belongings, Arya led Saren through the winding streets. She explained how Bravos was built on a cluster of islands, connected by arched bridges, each district sporting its own unique flair. Gondolas and flat-bottomed boats glided through the canals, ferrying passengers or goods. Minstrels performed on street corners, some singing in Bravosi, others crooning old Valyrian ballads. Merchant shops displayed everything from fine silks to pearls. Saren found himself both overwhelmed and intrigued by the city's bustling intensity. If any place in the world had knowledge of hidden magics or secret cults, it would be Bravos, where so many paths converged. They made their way to a quiet courtyard in the district known as the Fishmonger's Square. People milled about, buying fresh catches of the day, haggling with fishwives whose stalls were piled high with eels, mussels, and shimmering sea bass. Beyond the square rose the House of Black and White, though from a distance one could only see its high, windowless walls of black and white stone. Arya paused, staring at that distant building with an expression Saren couldn't quite read, part nostalgia, part apprehension. "Will you go back there?" Saren asked gently. Arya exhaled. "Not if I can help it. The faceless men served their own ends. I was a tool and I left them behind. But Bravos has many corners. I want to check the alleys and taverns for rumors. If there is any cult or group dabbling in winter magic, the city's underbelly might have heard whispers. Saren agreed, though he felt uneasy. The memory of that cold presence on the deck of the Sea Razor still hovered at the edge of his mind, as if the Great Other's watchers might be anywhere. They spent the day searching for leads, wandering from one smoky tavern to another. Arya's Bravosi accent, refined from her younger days, got them in and out of conversation easily, though not always fruitfully. Most people they questioned shrugged or laughed at the idea of an icy threat stirring across the sea. A few suggested the Red Priests might know more, as they were rumored to sense all manner of dark powers. But no one had concrete evidence. Near sunset, they found themselves by the Moon Pool, a basin at the heart of Bravos where the highborn sometimes gathered for festivities. Marble steps led down to the water, now reflecting the pink and orange hues of twilight. The air was cooler here, an evening breeze riffling the surface. A handful of Bravosi courtiers drifted about in silks and lace, sipping from silver cups. Musicians plucked gentle tunes from stringed instruments. Saren glanced around, feeling out of place in his travel-worn garb. "It's a dead end," Arya muttered, leaning against a pillar. "No one knows anything about a winter cult. They care more about minted coins and shipping routes. We might have to check with the Red Temple after all." Saren nodded. "I'm willing, though I recall some in Westeros spoke of the Red Priests as zealots with their own agenda. Will they help us?" "They might, if they think the Great Other is stirring," Arya said. "Lawloress followers view the Great Other as their eternal enemy. If they believe we're serious, we could gain powerful allies." That plan settled, they returned to their inn. Over a simple dinner of black bread and fish stew, they discussed how best to approach the temple. The Red Temple in Bravos was known for flamboyant displays of fire magic, for preaching about the Lord of Light, and for healing. It was rumored a wise old priest named Gomero oversaw the local congregation, though finding him might not be straightforward. Early the next day, they rose and set out through the labyrinth of streets once more. Bravos bustled with early commerce, hawkers urging passers-by to try fresh pastries, gamblers throwing dice in the corners, water sellers chanting prices for a ladleful. They crossed the famed Sweetwater Bridge, its arches decorated with mosaic tiles, then angled east toward a poorer district. Here the canals were narrower, the buildings more worn. Children scampered barefoot, and beggars lingered in doorways. Eventually, they found a modest structure of red brick topped by a small brass dome. A plaque bearing a flame emblem hung over the door. Indeed, it was the Red Temple. Unlike the grand temples in Volantis or even certain enclaves in King's Landing, the Bravosi Temple seemed subdued, perhaps because the city's laws frowned on overtly flashy religious displays. Smoke wafted from vents in the dome, suggesting something burned within. A pair of red-robed acolytes stood at the entrance, eyeing visitors warily. Arya approached, switching to the common tongue. "We seek Priest Gomero. It concerns a matter of darkness that might plague these lands." One acolyte, a young woman with shaved head, asked, "Who are you that seeks him?" Her Bravosi accent was thick, but her voice held an air of authority. Arya and Saren exchanged glances. Arya decided honesty was their best chance. "My name is Arya Stark of House Stark in the north. This is Saren, my companion. We're told the Red Priests wage an eternal war against the Great Other. We want to speak about that very threat." The acolyte's eyes flicked over Saren, lingering on his pale complexion. She murmured something in Bravosi to her fellow, then nodded curtly. "Wait here." She slipped inside. Moments later, she returned, beckoning them to follow. The interior of the temple was dimly lit by braziers lining a central aisle, each burning with a deep red flame that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Tapestries depicting scenes of fire and light hung in the gloom. A sweet, pungent aroma filled the air, some mixture of incense and exotic spices. At the far end, near a small altar, an older man knelt on a cushion garbed in red and orange robes that flickered like embers. His hair was gray and thin, cropped close, and his weathered face held a calm gravity. He rose gracefully as they approached. "I am Gomero," he said, voice soft. "You speak of the Great Other. Come, let us see what you would say." They were guided to kneel on cushions before him. Arya hesitated at kneeling, but complied. Saren followed suit, though the position reminded him of old rites. Gomero studied them with curious eyes. We hear many claims of darkness in the city, from petty warlocks to whispered devotions. Yet you come with something deeper, I sense. Arya nodded. We have reason to believe the Great Other's magic lingers in pockets across the world, including in Essos. We want to know if your followers have encountered anything like that. Strange ice attempts to harness winter's power. Gomero's express. Ion remained serene, but his tone hardened slightly. The Great Other, the enemy of Lawler, always seeks a foothold. Darkness loves corners. Yet we have not seen whites or white walkers here, if that is your question. Saren breathed in the scent of incense, calming himself. It's not just whites anymore. There are remnants of the magic searching for a new vessel. I was once linked to that power. He paused, meeting Gomero's gaze. I was the Night King before I was freed. The admission caused the acolytes in the shadows to exchange startled looks. Gomero's eyes widened slightly, but he showed no alarm, only a deepening interest. A rare tale indeed. And if it is truth, then you bear scars on your soul that not even fire can fully purge. Yet you say you are freed. Yes, Saren answered. The old gods, the powers of the north, allowed me to return to mortality. Now I've made it my duty to ensure the Great Other finds no new champion. Gomero closed his eyes briefly, murmuring a prayer in Valyrian. The braziers along the aisle crackled, sending sparks dancing into the air. When he looked at Saren again, his gaze was full of empathy. Light and dark, locked forever in combat. You once stood at the heart of the darkness, and now you stand against it. The Lord of Light teaches that redemption can be found by those who truly turn from shadow. Arya pressed on, cutting through the reverent hush. We want to know if any rumors have reached your temple, individuals performing rites with ice, or any mention of the Great Other beyond the typical religious invocations. Gomero spread his hands. The Red Priests watch for signs, but Braavos is a city of illusions. Magic is frowned upon here, especially outside the House of Black and White, which deals in its own brand of mysteries. However, we have heard vague accounts from far-off places, ships docking from the Jade Sea, travelers from Ass High, whispering that certain groups delve into old, forbidden powers. The city of Ass High itself stands at the edge of the known world, a place where shadowbinders and warlocks practice arts we cannot wholly fathom. Saren recalled the Hedge Witch's warning about the Shadowlands. A pang of unease traveled through him. So you think that is where the Great Other's remnants might fester? Gomero sighed. It is possible. The Lord of Light's followers have always found strong opposition in Ass High from the worshippers of darkness. They speak of the shadow that devours men's souls. If the Great Other's essence lingers, it may well be embraced by those who dwell there. Arya frowned. Askai is on the far side of the world. It's not somewhere you simply ride into. The journey alone could cost a fortune, and who knows if we'd survive once we arrived. Gomero studied her carefully. You do not have to go. The burden of battling darkness is not yours alone. Yet you came to me. You came seeking knowledge. I am bound to speak truth. If you wish to ensure the Great Other never finds a champion, you may eventually need to look beyond the free cities, beyond even the borders of the Dothraki Sea, to the Shadowlands themselves. Or wait, and hope that whatever festers there never crosses the sea to your home again. Arya exchanged a glance with Saren. Neither spoke. The enormity of what Gomero suggested weighed on them. The priest rose from his cushion with a surprising lightness. For now, remain in Braavos as you will. We have no immediate accounts of winter magic here. But if you wish to glean more, I can give you a letter to one of our Red Sisters in Pentos, who might have heard more recent rumors. And from there, others can guide you further east. Arya and Saren accepted the offer, unsure whether they would use it. Gomero retreated to another chamber, returning with a folded parchment sealed with the imprint of a flame. Give this to Sister Ellerin in Pentos. She has been investigating certain foreign priests who arrived from the Jade Sea. It may be a dead end, or it may be your next step. They thanked him. Before they left, Gomero gently touched Saren's shoulder, murmuring, "Keep your faith in the light you have found. Once, the flame was overshadowed by ice, but it has not been extinguished." Saren bowed his head, gratitude mingling with a fresh wave of responsibility. The braziers flickered as they stepped back into the bright midday sun of Braavos. They returned to their inn, discussing the priest's words. Arya seemed torn, pacing near the hearth in the common room. If the real threat lies across the world in Ashai, we'd be chasing ghosts. Could take months, years even, just to get there if we survive. And what if we find nothing? Meanwhile, Westeros might face other dangers. Saren rubbed his temples, feeling the stirrings of a headache. I know, but the possibility that the great other's power might be nurtured there, I can't ignore it. Maybe we should at least check Pentos first, see if Sister Ellerin can confirm any leads. If we find real evidence of this threat, then we decide whether to push on. Arya stopped pacing. It's a risk. Everything about this is a risk. But I understand. We didn't come all this way to do nothing. She sighed, frustration coloring her tone. I'd hoped to find something immediate here in Braavos, some clear sign or cult to root out. But it seems the real trouble is further away. They spent the remainder of the day gathering supplies and verifying that Captain Brego was still in port. They found him at a dockside tavern, half drunk and boasting of a profitable trade he'd made selling rare northern furs. He was willing to sail to Pentos for a fair price, though Arya haggled him down by reminding him of her family's favor. Brego eventually yielded, good-naturedly complaining about stark cunning. On the third morning after their arrival in Braavos, they stepped aboard the Sea Razor once more. The city receded behind them in a haze of domes and spires, the Titan's stoic face fading into the distance. Saren felt a pang of regret at leaving so soon. Braavos was complex and alive, a place he might have liked to explore further. But their mission drove them on. Gomero's letter was tucked safely inside Arya's belt pouch. The voyage to Pentos was shorter, but made tense by rumors of pirates who sometimes prowled the waters between the free cities. Brego posted extra lookouts, and Arya joined them at times, scanning the horizon with keen eyes. Yet they encountered no trouble. The days passed in a steady rhythm, the rush of wind in the sails, the tang of brine, the creaking of wood. At night, Saren sometimes dreamed of swirling shadows, uncertain if they were omens or just the swirling anxieties in his own mind. Then, on a misty morning, they saw the faint outline of Pentos rising on the coast. The city spread across a bay, its walls a mix of sun-bleached stone and turquoise-tiled roofs. Dome towers jutted upward, and the area near the harbor bustled with merchant galleys and fishing boats. Pentos was known for its opulence, for princely displays of wealth, and for the presence of Sel's words from every corner of Essos. The Sea Razor found a berth among a throng of vessels, each flying different flags, Lysine swans, Myrish eyes, even a few Carthene ships with ornate prows. Dockworkers clamored for coin, offering to unload cargo or guide passengers to local inns. Arya and Saren waited for Brego to settle harbor fees, then disembarked, careful to keep their belongings close. Pentos assaulted the senses with vibrant color and relentless noise. The heat felt intense compared to the north, though it was only mild by local standards. Food vendors sold skewers of spiced meat, the air thick with exotic scents. Street performers danced or juggled torches, hoping for coins from passing travelers. Wealthy Pentoshi moved about in flowing silks, often carried in litters by servants. Beggars lingered in alleys, calling out with pitiful cries. The city's famed temple spires gleamed in the sunlight, each dedicated to a different deity. At first, Arya and Saren tried to navigate the chaos on their own, searching for the red temple that Gomero's letter directed them to. Yet the labyrinth of Pentos was confusing, full of twisting streets and hidden courtyards. They soon realized they'd need a local guide. A ragged boy approached them, offering to lead them to the Temple of the Red Fire Lady in exchange for a silver coin. Arya eyed the boy suspiciously. "How do I know you won't rob us?" The boy grinned, revealing crooked teeth. "I can't rob you if I lead you, can I? Unless I have a gang waiting in an alley. But I don't." He lifted his hands as if to show he had nothing hidden. She snorted. "Cheeky. 1 silver if you guide us safely, plus a copper more if you don't lie." They set off through narrow lanes where donkey carts clogged the passage and doorways spilled noisy families onto the street. The boy led them past a bazaar brimming with bright fabrics and stalls selling delicate glass beads. The clamor reminded Saren of Braavos, but with a sharper edge. Pentos lacked some of the refined order the Braavosi prided themselves on. Here, raw commerce and wealth-lording were more blatant, and cruelty lurked beneath the wealth like a coiled serpent. Eventually, they reached a modest compound with high red-plastered walls. A wrought iron gate displayed the sigil of a flame. 2 temple guards in red half-cloaks stood watch, spears in hand. The boy bowed mock theatrically, palm outstretched for payment. Arya handed him the coin. He dashed off, whooping. Inside the courtyard, red-tinted pavers led to a central shrine. Statues of Lawler flanked the entrance, each carved from dusky stone with a stylized flame in place of a face. Incense coals smoldered in braziers, giving the air a spicy aroma. A tall woman in red robes emerged, her face lined but dignified, with hair the color of burnished copper. She regarded Arya and Saren calmly as if she'd already expected them. "I am Sister Ellerin," she said. "Gomero's raven arrived yesterday, informing me you might come." Arya stepped forward, bowing slightly. "We carry his letter." She handed it over. Ellerin read it swiftly, lips forming a thin line. "So, you seek knowledge of winter's shadows," the priestess murmured, gazing at Saren. "He told me of your nature, the redemption you found. The Lord of Light sees all, and your path is truly unusual." Saren inclined his head. "We want to know if any group in Essos might be calling upon the Great Other's power." Ellerin motioned for them to follow her into a side chamber. The temple's interior was cooler, lit by a series of skylights. Bright murals on the walls depicted battles between fire and shadow, each scene more dramatic than the last. She led them to a long wooden table where scrolls and parchments were scattered. Taking a seat, she gestured for them to do the same. "We have heard rumors," Ellerin said quietly. "Travelers from the Far East speak of cults in the shadow lands that worship darkness incarnate, though whether it is the Great Other or some other manifestation we cannot say. But more pressing are the sightings along the Jade Sea. Merchant ships claim to have seen unnatural storms that freeze sails in moments. Some whisper the storms are guided by robed figures on remote islands near High." Arya leaned forward, heart pounding. "So it's not just a rumor? There really are people harnessing ice storms?" Ellerin nodded. "The accounts are scattered and some might be tall tales. Yet we've heard enough to suspect that a new power has begun stirring in those waters. A few red priests ventured there to investigate, but none returned. Our scrying fires show only swirling mists." Saren closed his eyes, bracing himself against a chill that trickled down his spine. They could be forging a new link to the Great Other or testing their ability to manipulate that magic. Ellerin studied him solemnly. "Yes. And if they succeed, your worst fears might be realized. A new champion for the Great Other, this time in the east, beyond the direct reach of the Westerosi armies. Imagine an army of whites or cold abominations marching from the Jade Sea inward. The devastation would be unimaginable before the realm could respond." Arya swallowed hard. "Is there no one else stopping them? What of the princes or warlords of Essos?" Ellerin scoffed softly. "They war among themselves for coin and territory, paying little heed to distant rumors of magical storms. Perhaps only the Shadowbinders of High or certain warlocks of Karth might realize the gravity. But they are as likely to join in for personal gain as to oppose it." Silence settled. Arya and Saren exchanged a look heavy with understanding. They had come this far seeking an answer, and now it loomed large. If the real threat lay near High, then that was where they must go. It was a journey that spanned half the world, a place known to break lesser souls. Even Daenerys Targaryen once traveled near there, yet her experiences were more whispered legend than recorded fact. High was the city of shadows, built along the River Ash, extending into darkness where the sun seemed to dim. Ellerin rose. "We can offer you letters of safe passage among some red enclaves as you travel east. It won't guarantee your safety outside the temple walls, but it may open doors. Yet the journey itself is perilous, requiring a long sea voyage or an equally dangerous trek across the Dothraki Sea and beyond. Neither route is kind to travelers." Arya placed a hand on the hilt of her sword as if grounding herself. "We knew the cost might be high, but if the alternative is letting the Great Other revive, we won't stand by." Ellerin's gaze flicked to Saren. "And you, Iceborn? Will you follow her?" He took a slow breath, recalling all the battles he'd fought internally, his guilt, his fear, his sense of duty. Yes, crossing half the globe to confront an uncertain threat was madness. But how could he live with himself if he turned away now? "I will," he said simply. "Better to face it than wait for it to come to us." A faint smile touched Ellerin's lips. "Very well. I will gather what documents I can. Pentos has ships traveling east, though few brave the Jade Sea. You may find a vessel to Volantis first, then continue along the coast. Or if you prefer to trek overland, you'll have to cross the Red Waste and the lands beyond. Either path is not for the faint of heart." Arya glanced at Saren. "Which route do you favor?" He considered. The sea route might allow them to reach the Jade Sea more directly, albeit through pirate-infested waters. The overland route was known for savage Dothraki hordes and swaths of desert. Neither was appealing. "The sea might be marginally safer," he ventured. "At least we can avoid the Dothraki." Arya chuckled. "I'm no stranger to horse lords, but you're right, an entire Khalasar would be trouble even for us." Then her voice grew serious. "Let's try the sea route. Volantis first, perhaps, then on to wherever we can catch a ship bound for the Far East." Ellerin agreed. I will ask among local captains. Some might be bold enough for the journey, especially if the pay is good and the cause is urgent. They spent days in Pentos, finalizing plans with Ellerin and exploring the city's bustling markets to gather essential supplies for a long voyage: water casks, dried meats, medicinal herbs, spare clothing suitable for hot climates. Arya also purchased a small cask of northern ale, perhaps a token of home or something to barter with should coin fail. Saren found a local smith forging intricate steel amulets. Though the amulets had no real magical power, he bought one shaped like a subtle flame, thinking it might serve as a symbol of solidarity with the red priests who were helping them. Their search for a ship took them to Pentos's harbor, where a forest of masts bobbed. Merchant galleys, fishing sloops, even a few military vessels sporting the colors of Lys or Tyrosh. Most captains balked at the idea of sailing beyond Volantis, claiming it was too far or too dangerous. Then they stumbled upon a battered cog named the Duskwind, commanded by a Tyroshi woman named Cherise. She was lanky with short turquoise-dyed hair and a loud, brash demeanor. At first, she laughed at the notion of going near the Jade Sea. But after Arya showed her the coin they could offer and Ellerin's letter detailing the cause, Cherise's laughter died. I'd be mad to do it, she said, leaning back against a crate of oranges. But mad ventures often pay well if you survive. I can take you to Volantis, then see if we can push east from there. No promises about the last leg, though. Let's see what the port conditions are like in Volantis first. Arya haggled over the price, eventually striking a deal that left them with just enough coin to manage the journey if they were frugal. The question still lingered: would Captain Brego or someone else from Westeros help them cross the Jade Sea eventually? They had to take one step at a time. First to Volantis, then onward. The day they boarded the Duskwind, Pentos shimmered under the midday sun, the heat palpable even near the water. Cherise's crew were a motley group: Tyroshi, a few Volantene freedmen, and even a lanky Norvashi who spoke barely any common tongue. They bustled about with colorful curses, hoisting sails, checking rigging, loading barrels of provisions. Arya stored their gear in a cramped cabin, while Saren said a silent farewell to Sister Ellerin, who had come to see them off. The priestess pressed a final scroll into their hands, full of references to other Red Temple enclaves in Volantis and beyond. As the ship cleared the harbor, the silhouette of Pentos receded behind them. The coastline spread southward, dotted with smaller fishing villages, until even those faded to the horizon. The open sea beckoned once more. This time, the journey would be longer, the stakes higher. Arya leaned against the railing, scanning the waves, while Saren watched the interplay of clouds overhead, considering how far they still had to go. That first night at sea, they found a calm patch of ocean under a moonless sky. The crew made do with salted fish and biscuits. Arya retired early to her bunk, exhausted from days of planning. Saren lingered on deck, letting the hush of darkness envelop him. The water sloshed against the hull in a lullaby of gentle waves. Then, faintly, he sensed a chill stirring in the back of his mind. Not the crispness of a normal breeze, but something else. A prickling, like the memory of wraiths sliding across ice. He gripped the railing, heart pounding. Was it real or just the echo of old anxieties? The horizon was empty, only the stars shining overhead. Yet the feeling persisted, a reminder that the great other was never truly gone. He closed his eyes, summoning the warmth that Bran had helped him forge. He pictured the heart tree in Winterfell's Godswood, the face carved in white bark, the swirl of red leaves whispering secrets. Let the echo pass, he told himself. You are free. Gradually, the chill eased, replaced by a quiet resolve. Whatever shadows lay ahead, he would face them. That vow anchored him as the ship carried them south, into realms neither Stark nor former Night King had ventured. The journey spanned many days, crossing wide stretches of ocean. They skirted the coast when possible, anchoring at small ports to resupply. Arya insisted on practicing her swordwork on deck, sometimes sparring with Saren using wooden staves. He found the rolling ship a challenge, but each bout improved his balance. The crew looked on with curiosity, occasionally laying bets on who might win a particular pass. Sometimes, EY heard rumors in the ports they briefly visited. Caravans from the east spoke of unseasonal cold in certain corners of the Dothraki Sea. A trader from Karth mentioned ghostly shapes haunting the straits near the Basilisk Isles, though that was usually a place known for pirates and slavers, not ice. Each tale might have been exaggeration, but taken together, they sketched a disturbing picture. Something was shifting in Essos, subtle but persistent, as if the Great Other tested the edges of the mortal world. At last, they neared the fabled Long Bridge of Volantis, a massive structure spanning the mouth of the River Rhoyne. The city perched on both banks, labyrinthine and colossal, older than most of Westeros' settlements. Huge walls towered, carved with the tigers and elephants that symbolized the city's ancient dynasties. Flames glowed from braziers mounted on the battlements, while the black and orange standard of Volantis fluttered in the sea breeze. Sherries guided the duskwind into Volantis' sprawling harbor, thick with ships from every corner of the known world. Arya and Saren stood at the prow, taking in the sight of black walls, far-reaching slums, and the temple spires that dotted the skyline. It was said that Volantis was the oldest of the free cities, once part of the Valyrian Empire. Here, the worship of Lawlor was strong, with a grand temple that dwarfed the outposts in Bravos and Pentos. As the crew moored the ship and negotiated docking fees, Sherry's turned to them. "This is as far as we agreed, but I'll be docked here a fortnight if the local merchants pay me well for freight. If you need a bit longer, we can talk coin. Beyond that, I can't promise anything, might have to sail back west if the tide of business pulls me." Arya nodded. "Thank you, Captain. We'll see how quickly we can sort our next step." The air in Volantis felt thick with heat and humidity, a stark contrast to the north. Elephant caravans rumbled along the wide streets, carrying goods and passengers. People thronged everywhere, from slaves in ragged tunics bearing marks on their cheeks to nobles in swirling silk robes. Towering arches framed the road to the Long Bridge, where countless shops and stalls lined each side. The smell of spiced foods and the calls of hawkers formed a cacophony that threatened to drown out thought. With Elrond's scroll in hand, they sought the Grand Red Temple. Guides along the way recognized the flame seal and directed them deeper into the city, past stately avenues and looming statues of Valyrian warlords. At length, they reached a colossal building crowned by a dome of hammered copper. Torches blazed in braziers along the entrance, casting dancing light over mosaic floors. Inside, the grandeur dwarfed the Bravosi or Pentoshi temples. The interior soared upward, with pillars carved into the shapes of fiery beacons. Dozens of red-robed priests and priestesses moved about, tending to kneeling worshippers or preparing incense. A hush of reverence and power hovered in the air. Arya and Saren approached an acolyte near the entrance, showing him the scroll from Sister Ellerin. The acolyte scanned it briefly, then led them past a series of shrines into a smaller chamber. The walls here were lined with tapestries depicting the Lord of Light's triumphs over shadow. Waiting within was a tall man with a shaved head wearing layered red and gold robes. He introduced himself as High Priest Baelor. "You have come from Sister Ellerin?" Baelor asked, voice echoing in the chamber's vaulted ceiling. "And you seek knowledge of the shadow worshippers in the east?" Arya nodded. "Yes. We suspect an attempt to revive the Great Other's power. We've heard rumors of ice storms and cults near As High. We want to stop it." Baelor studied them with a penetrating gaze. "A bold quest. Many would scoff, yet your eyes hold unwavering resolve." He turned to Saren. "And you? Gomero's message claimed you are the freed Night King. I have never heard such a tale in all my days." Saren inclined his head, preparing himself for the usual mix of disbelief and awe. "It's true, though I do not relish it. I've been freed from that power and now hope to see it destroyed." Baelor clasped his hands. "The Red Temple has had limited luck sending envoys east. Our ships vanish or return with no news. But we do know that further along the coast, near the Isle of Elephants and the Straits of Malabar, there are rumors of a sorcerer gathering acolytes to proclaim a new dawn of ice. If that is your path, I can direct you to certain merchants who ply the Jade Sea. They might ferry you closer, though they charge dear prices for the risk." Arya rubbed her temples. "We expected that. We're willing to pay within reason. Do you have any more tangible leads on who the sorcerer might be?" Baelor's brow furrowed. "Only scraps. Some call him the Pale Spider, others say he is but a herald for a greater force. The story shifts with each telling, but all speak of a figure who has harnessed cold winds and claims to be anointed by the Great Other. It could be a lie, but if it is real, it must be challenged." Saren felt a chill run through him again, a sense that the Great Other was no longer just a disembodied echo. If someone had successfully tapped into that power, the ramifications were dire. "We'll need a ship that can actually reach those straits. Then we can see for ourselves." Baelor nodded. "I'll have one of my priestesses, Vanya, accompany you if you wish. She's gifted in reading the flames and can sometimes ward off lesser shadows. But be warned, if this is truly the Great Other's work, her powers might be tested beyond their limits." Arya considered, scanning Saren's face for agreement. If she's willing to come, we won't turn down the help. It will be her choice, Baelor confirmed. We do not force any into such a perilous journey. But she has spoken of visions of swirling ice devouring the east. She might see it as her calling. They spent the following day in Volantis, resting from the long voyage and gathering their nerve for the next leg. The city's scorching afternoons and humid nights wore on Saren, who had always been acclimated to the north's cool air. Arya teased him gently for seeking shady corners, reminding him they'd face even hotter climates if they ventured closer to the Red Waste or Sithorios. He accepted her banter with a rueful smile, grateful for some levity amidst the mounting tension of their quest. By midday, Priestess Vanya, a lean woman with dusky skin and hair braided in intricate loops, met them in the temple courtyard. She offered a respectful bow. I have seen in the flames that your cause is dire. I will walk the path with you until we unravel this threat. May Lalorest light guide us. So their party grew by one, Arya Stark, Saren, and Vanya the Red Priestess. They parted ways with Sherry's, the Tyroshi captain who refused to risk the Jade Sea. Instead, Vanya introduced them to a band of southern merchants in the harbor who specialized in carrying spices and rare goods to port towns along the coast beyond Valyria's southwestern waters. These merchants had no illusions about the dangers: pirates, storms, monstrous sea creatures rumored to dwell in unknown waters. But coin could move mountains, and the three travelers were determined to pool their resources. After several days of negotiation, a deal was struck with an Ibonese trader named Dago. He was short but stocky, with a thick beard and a booming laugh. His vessel, the Sea Sower, was a sturdy caravel not built for speed but known to endure harsh conditions. He warned them that once they sailed past the Summer Isles, the routes became uncertain, with fewer safe harbors. They might have to rely on cunning and luck to reach the Jade Sea. Arya and Saren steeled themselves. They had come too far to turn back. So began another departure, this time from Volantis' massive harbor. Crowds thronged the docks, but few paid mind to a small group of travelers boarding an Ibonese caravel. The Sea Sower set sail under a scorching sun, heading southward first, then turning east. Vanya spent much of her time on deck, praying at dawn and sunset, staring into a brazier she kept meticulously lit with coals. Arya took note of every detail on the horizon, while Saren tried to handle the sweltering heat without complaint. Weeks slid by in a blur of endless waves and the occasional respite at small coastal settlements. They passed through the waters near the Summer Isles, glimpsing lush, verdant shores to the south. Occasionally, the local islanders paddled out in sleek canoes to trade fruit for cloth or metal tools. The respite of fresh produce brightened the crew's spirits. Arya and Saren marveled at the glimpses of these tropical lands, so different from the North's stark beauty. But as they pressed on, the shipping lanes grew emptier, the maps less reliable. A thick haze sometimes lay over the sea, and rumors among the crew circulated about ghost ships or fleeting shapes that vanished in the mist. Each time, Saren's heart lurched, wondering if it was the Great Other's influence. Yet no open attacks occurred, and the only danger they faced came from storms that battered the ship with sheets of rain and howling winds. By virtue of Ago's skill and the Sea Sower's sturdiness, they pressed through each tempest, though some cargo was lost. At last, they found themselves navigating the southwestern approach to the Jade Sea, a region few Westerosi had ever witnessed. The waters shifted in hue, reflecting patches of brilliant emerald near reefs and darker jade further out. Exotic seabirds soared overhead, their cries echoing across the rolling waves. The climate was stifling, the air thick with humidity that clung to every inch of skin. The crew peeled down to light garments, though Vanya insisted on keeping some portion of her red robes. She said the color was a symbol, a warning to the darkness. A hush often fell on deck, as if the sailors felt they were crossing the threshold into a realm where normal rules might not apply. Arya, hair sticking to her forehead with sweat, paced by the railing, scanning the horizon for signs of land. Saren tried to meditate as best he could, balancing the swirl of nerves in his gut. If the rumors were true, they would soon be near the area where ice storms and robed figures lurked. Then, on a misty dawn, their watchman shouted from the crow's nest. A faint shape broke the horizon, a landmass, perhaps an island, half-shrouded by swirling fog. The air felt oddly cool here, a distinct shift from the prior day's oppressive heat. Immediately, the crew grew uneasy. Ago cursed under his breath. This was the place rumored to harbor the new threat, the Isle of Bones or Isle of Elephants. Descriptions varied, but it was near enough to the domain of Ass High to set fear in hardened souls. Arya, Saren, and Vanya gathered near the helm. The temperature drop was unmistakable, a chill breeze wafted over them, thick with the promise of something unnatural. Arya's breath caught. Feels like winter, she murmured, even though they were in the midst of a tropical zone. Vanya closed her eyes, murmuring a prayer to Lawler. I sense the shadow here. A cold shadow swirling. Saren's pulse hammered. Every nerve in his body screamed that the great other's presence was near. He glanced at Arya. Her face was set, determined. They had come so far, this was the moment to learn the truth. Ago insisted the sea sower keep a safe distance. No amount of coin could convince him to sail closer. They dropped anchor a few miles out, launching a smaller boat to ferry the three travelers toward shore. The water lapped at the boat's sides, each stroke of the oars echoing in the hushed air. Fog closed around them, threading through the rigging. Arya rowed, her muscles tensed. Saren sat in the bow, scanning the gloom for shapes. Vanya kept her brazier at her feet, tiny flames flickering against the damp air. Soon, they heard the faint roar of waves breaking on a rocky shore. A sliver of black sand appeared ahead. They beached the boat and dragged it ashore, securing it above the tidal. The island's interior lay wreathed in swirling mists that glowed faintly in the early light. To one side, they could see jagged rocks rising from the water like broken teeth. To the other, a cluster of stunted trees bent in an unnatural shape, their leaves rimed with a thin coating of frost. Saren stooped to touch a leaf. Ice crystals flaked off in his hand, and the temperature felt more like a northern winter than a tropical domain. It's real, Arya breathed, alarm coloring her voice. We must be on the right trail. They moved inland, senses on high alert. Each footstep crunched on half-frozen ground. The swirling fog parted intermittently, revealing glimmers of stony outcroppings or twisted driftwood coated in frost. Vanya's brazier crackled, offering some measure of warmth, though the priestess's face showed strain. She seemed to be struggling against the oppressive chill as if it fought her flame. After a time, they spotted a faint bluish glow through the haze. Arya motioned for silence, drawing her dagger. Saren felt that old tug inside his chest, the same he'd experienced in the cavern beyond the wall. Each breath burned with cold. They crept closer, weaving between jagged rocks. Then they saw it, a ring of stones in a small clearing, swirling with a pale, unnatural light. Within the circle stood figures in dark robes. At their center loomed a man tall and gaunt, his face partially obscured by swirling frost. He held his hands aloft, chanting in a language that made Saren's skin crawl, tones reminiscent of the ancient tongue of the first men, but twisted with dark vowels. Arya froze, eyes widening. Vanya tightened her grip on the brazier's stand, whispering, "It's him." Or one of them. The robed man's incantation caused frigid tendrils of mist to rise from the earth, curling around the stones. If he noticed them approaching, he gave no sign. Then the man's voice rose, echoing, "The cold dawn shall break upon the living. I am the pale spider, harbinger of the great winter. Join me, children of ice." A resonant wave of cold blasted outward. Saren staggered, barely keeping his footing. He realized with a jolt that the man's eyes glowed a pale blue. This was no simple charlatan, the figure truly channeled the great other's essence. It coiled in the air, hungry. At the ring's edge, several robed acolytes sank to their knees, faces contorted with ecstasy or terror. Arya hissed, "We can't let him finish that ritual." She hefted her dagger. "Saren, can you break it?" He swallowed. "I'll try. But if it's more powerful than before, I might need you to distract him." Vanya whispered a prayer, summoning a ball of flame in her palm. "Lawler, guide our hands." They broke cover, rushing into the clearing. The pale spider turned, his lips twisted in a rictus grin. Frost crackled under their feet as each step brought them closer. The robed acolytes scrambled up, brandishing weapons of ice, blades that shimmered with malignant energy. Arya leapt into the fray, her dagger biting through an ice blade with a sharp clang. Sparks flew, and she twisted to avoid a slash from another acolyte. Vanya hurled her flame orb at a third, setting his robes alight. He shrieked, thrashing in the snow like frost. Saren advanced on the pale spider, each footstep an effort against the freezing aura. He felt the old compulsion tugging at him as if the great other recognized its former vessel. The man's cold eyes locked on Saren with triumph. "You return to the fold," he said in a whisper that carried unnaturally over the din. "Kneel, or be destroyed." "I kneel to no shadow," Saren growled. He summoned the warmth he'd learned to channel, pressing his palms together. Greenish light flickered around his fingertips, the essence of the old gods. The pale spider laughed, a hollow sound that vibrated with chilling force. "You pit the forest's memory against the infinite night? Foolish." He raised one hand, calling a spear of ice to coalesce in the air. It launched toward Saren with deadly speed. Saren ducked, feeling the spear graze his shoulder, leaving a stinging numbness behind. He clenched his jaw, ignoring the pain. He had to break the summoning. Arya, having dispatched 2 acolytes, flung a dragonglass dagger at the pale spider's back. He spun unnaturally fast, shattering the dagger with a flick of cold wind. Ice crystals scattered. Arya cursed, weaving closer, but another acolyte blocked her path, swinging a frosty blade. She parried, face set in grim determination. Vanya attempted to cast more fire, chanting prayers. The pale spider snarled, turning his attention to her. A wave of frost erupted, snuffing out the flame in her hands and knocking her back into a stone. She hit the ground with a gasp, the brazier tumbling away. The circle pulsed with eerie light, intensifying as the ritual continued. Saren forced himself forward. The swirling cold battered him, but he had no choice. He could sense the core of the Great Other's presence anchored in the pale spider, fueling this unearthly chill. Reaching out both hands, he let the green warmth surge, an image of weirwood trees flooding his mind. The pale spider howled as the warmth clashed with his ice aura, sparks of frost and green flame dancing in the air. "Traitor," hissed the robed man. "Your power belongs to the darkness. You are the rightful king of winter." Saren's voice trembled with fury. "I am Stark." He channeled everything he had learned from Bran, from the godwood, from the countless moments of his mortal redemption. A burst of emerald energy flared around him, colliding with the swirling ice. For an instant, the clearing blazed with conflicting forces, the ground trembling under their feet. The pale spider shrieked, the glow in his eyes faltering. Arya saw the opening. She ducked past the last acolyte, her blade slicing an arc that struck the robed man's side. It wasn't a mortal blow, but it shattered his concentration. The swirling frost wavered. Saren drove his power deeper, severing the tether to the Great Other that the pale spider had cultivated. With a thunderous crack, the ring of stones collapsed, ice crystals crumbling. The acolytes dropped to their knees, weapons vanishing. The pale spider stumbled, clutching his wounded side, eyes still alight with hatred. "This is not the end," he spat. "My master's coil stretches beyond your feeble reach." Arya lunged, aiming to finish him. But he flung out a hand, unleashing one last burst of cold that froze her feet to the ground momentarily. Then he turned and staggered into the mists, limping away with astonishing speed. Saren, drained from the clash, tried to pursue, but his legs nearly buckled. Arya snarled, smashing the ice around her ankles, giving chase. Yet the pale spider melted into the fog, leaving only echoes of his ragged breathing. By the time Arya reached the edge of the clearing, he was gone. Silence fell, broken only by the moans of wounded acolytes. Vanya crawled to her brazier, relighting a small flame. The freezing aura dissipated slowly, but it left the island still unnaturally cold. Arya returned, eyes blazing with frustration. He vanished. That damn fog swallowed him. I left a trail of blood, but it stops at the rocks. Saren sank to his knees, chest heaving. We disrupted the ritual," he managed. He couldn't finish forging the link. A wave of relief mingled with despair. The pale spider was an agent, or perhaps a herald, of something larger. If he escaped, the Great Other's cause would continue. But at least they had thwarted one attempt at full manifestation. Vanya approached them, nursing a bruise on her temple. "He may be wounded, but he remains dangerous. Lawlor's light triumphed here, but the darkness is not gone." She gazed around at the scattered, groaning acolytes. Some were unconscious, others clutched injuries. "What do we do with them?" Arya scowled. "If we take them back to the ship, the crew might panic. But we can't leave them to freeze or starve. Maybe we bind them and question them first." As they debated, one acolyte crawled closer, coughing. His hood fell back, revealing a young man's face twisted with confusion. "We were promised new life, new power," he whispered, tears freezing on his cheeks. "He said the cold would purge our pain." Saren's heart twisted. These were misguided souls, seduced by the lure of a twisted salvation. "That cold would only turn you into a puppet of the Great Other," he said softly. "You must release it or it will devour you." The young man's eyes flickered with regret. "We didn't know. We just believed. Please, don't kill us." Vanya offered him a sip of water from a flask. "We can help you see the truth. Lawlor's warmth stands against the Great Other. But you must choose life." One by one, they gathered the acolytes, most too weak or dazed to resist. Arya deftly tied them with rope, ignoring curses from a couple who still seemed devoted to the pale spider's cause. Those with serious injuries she tended roughly but effectively. The ring of stones lay in shambles, the frost receding from its epicenter. Yet an oppressive chill lingered. Saren could almost feel the island itself exhaling sorrow. They led the bound acolytes back to the boat. Some stumbled, others wept. At the shore, they found the sea sower's small boat still intact. Arya frowned. "We can't cram all these prisoners aboard, but leaving them here is a death sentence. They might starve or freeze." Saren helped one limping acolyte down to the water. We can transport them in shifts or see if the sea sower can meet us closer to the beach. But we need to get out of this cursed fog. It took several arduous trips ferrying them back and forth. Ago and his crew were none too pleased to see the ragged group of cultists, and only the promise of added coin and possibly fear of the Red Priestess's ire kept them from casting off immediately. They set up a makeshift holding area on the ship's lower deck, guarded by a few stalwart sailors. The young acolyte who had spoken openly was placed in a separate corner, perhaps more open to reason. Once the last trip was done, night had fallen, though the sky remained eerily overcast. Arya, Saren, and Vanya collapsed onto crates in the sea sower's hold, exhaustion radiating through their bones. The flickering lantern light revealed cuts, bruises, and a haunted look in each pair of eyes. "We found him, or at least one of them," Arya said, voice raw. "And he slipped away. All that work and the real threat is still out there." "We foiled his immediate plan," Vanya responded. "The link was not completed. That is something." Saren stared at the planks underfoot, replaying the confrontation. He remembered the pale spider's words, "Kneel or be destroyed," that insinuation that he was still bound to the great other's legacy. A shudder passed through him. Arya noticed. She placed a hand on his arm. "You're free. Don't let him twist your mind." He nodded. Feeling the sting of tears he refused to shed. "I know, but there are more like him. If they unite, if they push further inland, or deeper across these seas, we might be facing an army." Vanya rose, steel in her posture. "Then we stand firm. The Lord of Light does not yield, and neither shall we. Tomorrow we'll question these acolytes, learn where the pale spider might be heading. Perhaps we can track him down again." Arya agreed, though her voice was taut. "We have to keep pushing forward, no matter how many times we face setbacks. For Westeros, for everyone." They parted ways for the night. Saren went to the cramped cabin he shared with Arya. As he slid onto the narrow bunk, his limbs felt like lead. His mind spun with the day's events, the unleashed power, the swirling fog. He wondered how many more confrontations lay ahead, how many cultists, how many fragments of the great other's will they would have to snuff out. Would it ever truly end? And yet, as he drifted into a fitful sleep, he clung to Arya's words. "We keep pushing forward." In the darkness, he sensed the faint spark of hope that had guided him since Bran freed him from his icy prison. That hope was all that stood between him and the endless cold. Even in these foreign seas, even on an island drenched in malevolent frost, that hope lit his path. He closed his eyes, feeling the gentle roll of the ship under him. Tomorrow, they would question the acolytes, glean new leads, and chase the pale spider if they must. The great other might reach across half the world to reclaim its champion, but Saren would not kneel. Not now, not ever. He had chosen to stand with the living, and so he would until his final breath. The vow echoed in his heart like a distant wolf's howl. He was Stark, he was free, and winter, no matter how far it reached, would not claim him again.